Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The sedan parked on the side of Highway 83 was spotted by Deputy Sheriff Cody Martinez at 2:47 a.m., as indicated by the clock on the dashboard. During his 7 years with the Val Verde County Sheriff's Department, he had driven countless times on the lonely Texas highway. This road split the landscape of miles of brush and mesquite trees in two, connecting small towns scattered across the border regions with Del Rio. On nights like this, when it was so close to the ground and the trees along the road cast long shadows across the asphalt, the isolation felt almost suffocating. Martinez slowed his patrol vehicle, angling his spotlight toward the abandoned car. It was a late-model Toyota Camry, silver or gray in the harsh white light, with Arizona plates. The hazard lights weren't on, which struck him as odd. Most people who broke down on this lonely stretch of highway made sure to signal their distress. He called in the plate number to dispatch, his voice cutting through the static-filled silence. Unit 47 to dispatch. I've got an abandoned vehicle at mile marker 122 on Highway 83, running Arizona plate Charlie Delta Romeo 4792. The response came back after a moment, delivered in the tired monotone of Savannah Lewis, the night dispatcher who'd been working the graveyard shift for the past 3 years. Copy that, Unit 47. Stand by while I run the plates. Martinez stepped out of his vehicle, the hot Texas night air hitting him immediately, despite the late hour. Even at nearly 3 in the morning, the temperature still hovered around 85 degrees. The only sounds were the ticking of his patrol car's engine and the distant chirp of crickets. He approached the sedan cautiously, his hand resting on his service weapon out of habit rather than genuine concern. The car was unlocked, which immediately raised his alertness level. The interior was pristine, almost suspiciously clean. No fast food wrappers, no water bottles, nothing to suggest a long road trip from Arizona. On the passenger seat sat a woman's purse, expensive looking, made of brown leather with gold clasps. A cell phone rested on the center console, its screen dark. Unit 47, that vehicle comes back registered to a Maria Gonzalez, age 34, from Phoenix. No wants or warrants. No missing person report filed. Martinez acknowledged the information and continued his inspection. The keys were still in the ignition. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank. He popped the hood. No visible mechanical issues. No leaking fluids. No obvious reason why someone would abandon a perfectly functional vehicle on a desolate highway in the middle of the night. He returned to the purse, using his pen to open it without leaving fingerprints. Inside, he found a wallet containing Maria Gonzalez's Arizona driver's license. The photo showed an attractive Hispanic woman with dark hair and warm brown eyes. There were credit cards, about $200 in cash, and a folded piece of paper with an address written on it. 1847 Ranch Road 2254, Comstock, Texas. Comstock was a tiny community about 30 miles north, barely more than a crossroads with a population of less than 400. Martinez knew Ranch Road 2254 well. It wound through some of the most isolated territory in the county, dotted with abandoned homesteads and working ranches that sprawled across thousands of acres. He keyed his radio again. Dispatch, can you try to make contact with the registered owner? Also, run a welfare check on 1847 Ranch Road 2254 in Comstock. Copy that, Unit 47. I'll try the phone number on file. That address, hold on. There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicking. That address doesn't come up in our system. Ranch Road 2254 exists, but the addresses out there only go up to about 1200. Martinez felt a familiar unease creeping up his spine. In his experience, non-existent addresses usually meant one of two things. Either someone had written it down wrong, or someone was being deliberately misled. He walked around the vehicle, shining his flashlight on the ground. About 10 feet from the driver's side door, he noticed something that made him stop. The sandy soil showed clear footprints. Small, probably a woman's based on the size. They led away from the road, heading into the brush. But there was something wrong with the pattern. The steps were uneven, dragging in places, as if the person had been stumbling or being pulled. Following the tracks with his flashlight, Martinez noticed more disturbing details. There were other prints, larger, made by boots. They overlapped with the smaller prints in places, creating a confusing pattern that was hard to read in the dancing beam of his flashlight. About 20 yards from the road, he found something that made his blood run cold, a torn piece of fabric caught on a mesquite thorn, dark with what looked like blood. He immediately returned to his vehicle and called for backup. Dispatch, I need additional units at my location, possible 207 inches, the code for kidnapping. Unit 47, the closest backup is Unit 23. Deputy Ramirez is about 45 minutes out. 45 minutes. Martinez cursed under his breath. That was the problem with patrolling Val Verde County. Over 3,000 square miles of territory, with barely a dozen deputies to cover it all during the night shift. He made a decision that would later be scrutinized by investigators and keep him awake for countless nights to come. Dispatch, I'm going to follow the tracks a short distance. Keep trying to reach the vehicle owner. He grabbed his larger flashlight from the patrol car, checked his weapon, and started following the footprints into the brush. The mesquite and cacti created a maze of thorns and shadows. Every few steps he'd stop and listen, but heard nothing except his own breathing and the rustle of small nocturnal animals fleeing from his approach. The tracks led him about 100 yards from the highway before they simply stopped. The ground here was harder, rockier, making it impossible to follow any further without better light and tracking equipment. But what troubled Martinez most was what he found at the point where the tracks ended. More blood. A significant amount pooled on a flat rock and already attracting ants. He was about to head back to his vehicle when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the desert night. It was mechanical, rhythmic, like an engine idling. But it was coming from much further into the brush, maybe a quarter-mile away. There were no roads out here, no reason for anyone to be running a vehicle in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m. Martinez stood perfectly still, straining to hear over his own heartbeat. The sound continued, steady and constant. He tried to radio dispatch but found his radio crackling with static. Not unusual in some of the more remote parts of the county where the repeater coverage was spotty. The smart thing would have been to return to his vehicle, wait for backup, approach the situation with proper support. But Martinez thought about Maria Gonzalez, about the blood on the rocks, about how every minute could mean the difference between life and death for her. He'd made these kinds of judgment calls before, had always trusted his instincts. Tonight, those instincts were screaming at him that something terrible was happening, and he was the only one close enough to stop it. He began moving toward the sound, his flashlight off now to avoid announcing his presence. The moon provided just enough light to navigate the treacherous terrain. Thorns caught at his uniform, and more than once he had to suppress a curse as he stumbled over unseen rocks. The mechanical sound grew louder, and now he could hear something else. Voices, male voices, though he couldn't make out the words. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, Martinez crested a small rise and found himself looking down into a natural depression in the landscape, almost like a bowl carved out of the desert floor. What he saw there made him immediately drop to his stomach, his hand moving instinctively to his weapon. Below him, illuminated by the headlights of 2 pickup trucks, were 3 men. They were standing around something on the ground, someone on the ground. Even from his position 50 yards away, Martinez could see it was a woman, and she wasn't moving. One of the men was holding what looked like a shovel. Martinez tried his radio again, whispering urgently, "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I have multiple suspects and a possible 187 in progress. I need immediate backup at my location, approximately quarter-mile northeast of mile marker 122. But all he got back was static. He had a decision to make. 3 suspects, possibly armed, and he was alone with backup at least 40 minutes away. If he tried to intervene now, he'd be outnumbered and outgunned if things went bad. But if that was Maria Gonzalez down there, and if she was still alive, waiting for backup might mean letting her die. One of the men suddenly looked up, scanning the ridge where Martinez was hidden. The deputy pressed himself flatter against the ground, hardly daring to breathe. After a long moment, the man turned back to his companions. Martinez could hear their voices more clearly now, carried by a shift in the wind. "Should have been more careful. This is getting too risky. Shut up and help me with this. We're already behind schedule." "What about her car? Wyatt's handling that. It'll be in Mexico by morning." Martinez's mind raced. This wasn't just a random attack. This was organized, planned. The mention of Mexico suggested connections to trafficking operations, maybe cartels. The scope of what he'd stumbled onto was becoming clearer and more dangerous by the second. He began to slowly back away from the ridge, planning to return to his vehicle and call for not just backup, but a full tactical response. But as he moved, his boot knocked loose a rock that clattered down the slope. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the desert quiet. All 3 men's heads snapped up, looking directly at his position. "Someone's up there." Martinez didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, crashing through the brush as shouts erupted behind him. He could hear them scrambling up the slope, could hear one of them yelling to get the trucks. His patrol vehicle seemed impossibly far away, and the thorns that had been annoying on the way in now seemed determined to trap him, catching his uniform, his skin, slowing him down. A gunshot cracked through the night, and Martinez felt the bullet whiz past his head, close enough that he could feel the heat of its passage. He zigzagged, trying to make himself a harder target while pulling his own weapon. He turned and fired 2 shots in the general direction of his pursuers, not really aiming, just trying to make them think twice about following too closely. More gunshots answered his, and Martinez felt a burning pain across his left shoulder. He'd been grazed, not seriously hurt, but the shock of it made him stumble. He caught himself, kept running, could see the highway ahead now, could see his patrol car's lights still illuminating the abandoned Toyota. He burst out of the brush and sprinted for his vehicle, diving behind it as more shots rang out. His radio suddenly crackled to life. He was back in range of the repeater. "Shots fired! Shots fired!" he screamed into the radio. "Officer down. I need immediate assistance at mile marker 122. He wasn't really down, but he knew those words would get every available unit racing his way, would wake up off-duty deputies, would bring the cavalry. He peered around the edge of his vehicle and saw 2 figures emerging from the brush, weapons raised. Martinez fired 3 more shots, controlled and aimed this time, and saw one of the figures stumble and fall. The other dropped to cover behind the Toyota. For a long moment there was silence except for Martinez's ragged breathing and the sound of his heart pounding in his ears. "Deputy," the man behind the Toyota called out, "you don't know what you're getting into here. Just drive away. Forget what you saw." "Can't do that," Martinez called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "Backup's already on the way. Surrender now, and things will go easier for you." The man laughed, a sound without humor. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Deputy. This goes way higher than some county sheriff's department. You think you're a hero? Heroes die out here. Nobody finds them for weeks, months. Just another missing cop, another unsolved case." Martinez could hear sirens in the distance, still far off, but getting closer. He just had to hold out a little longer. "Maybe," he called back, "but not tonight." The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then Martinez heard the sound of truck engines starting up in the desert. The man behind the Toyota suddenly broke cover and ran into the darkness. Martinez let him go, maintaining his position, not willing to pursue alone again. When backup finally arrived, 2 units with sirens wailing and lights flashing, they found Martinez still crouched behind his patrol car, weapon drawn, blood seeping from his shoulder. Deputy Jose Ramirez was first on scene, approaching cautiously until Martinez identified himself. "They're gone," Martinez said, finally lowering his weapon, "but there's a woman out there." "About a quarter-mile northeast. She was on the ground, not moving. We need to find her." What followed was a massive search operation that would involve not just the sheriff's department but state troopers, Texas Rangers, and eventually the FBI. They found the depression in the desert where Martinez had seen the men, tire tracks from the trucks, shell casings from the firefight. But they didn't find Maria Gonzalez. They did find the man Martinez had shot, dead, about 50 yards from where he'd fallen, apparently having tried to crawl away. His fingerprints identified him as Marcus Webb, a small-time criminal with connections to human trafficking operations along the border. In his pocket was a burner phone with text messages that would eventually lead to a larger investigation, one that would reveal a network of kidnappings, murders, and cover-ups that reached into the highest levels of local government. But that would all come later. That night, as Martinez sat in the back of an ambulance having his shoulder treated, all he could think about was Maria Gonzalez. Had she still been alive when he'd seen her? Could he have saved her if he'd acted differently? The questions would haunt him for years to come. 3 days after the incident on Highway 83, the Val Verde County Sheriff's Department was in chaos. Federal agents had descended on the small department like locusts, taking over conference rooms, demanding files, and conducting interviews with every deputy who'd worked in the county for the past 5 years. Deputy Cody Martinez found himself at the center of it all, retelling his story over and over to different investigators, each one searching for some detail he might have missed. The lead FBI agent, a sharp-featured woman named Special Agent Abigail Flores, had set up her command post in Sheriff Colton Brooks' own office, much to the sheriff's visible displeasure. She was thorough, methodical, and seemed to trust no one in the department. "Tell me again about the address," Agent Flores said during Martinez's 4th interview. They were in a small interrogation room that usually held drunk drivers and petty thieves. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the air conditioning struggled against the late morning heat. 1847 Ranch Road, 2254. "You're certain that's what the paper said?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm certain. I've been over this." "I know you have, Deputy, but details matter here. That address doesn't exist, as you know. But someone wrote it down. Someone gave it to Maria Gonzalez. Why?" Martinez shifted in his uncomfortable metal chair. His shoulders still ached from the bullet graze, and he hadn't been sleeping well. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that depression in the desert, the men standing over the motionless figure. Maybe it was a meeting point. A code? Agent Flores nodded slowly. That's what we're thinking. We've found similar non-existent addresses in other cases. It seems to be how they communicate meeting locations to victims. They give them an address that sounds legitimate, but when the victim can't find it and stops to figure out where they are, they become vulnerable, Martinez finished. Exactly. Stopped on a remote highway, confused, probably calling the number they were given for directions. Easy targets. The door opened, and Deputy Jose Ramirez stuck his head in. Agent Flores, Sheriff Brooks needs to speak with you. Says it's urgent. Flores stood, smoothing her dark suit. We'll continue this later, Deputy Martinez. Don't go far. After she left, Martinez sat alone in the interrogation room, his mind churning over everything that had happened. The department had been turned upside down by the investigation. Everyone was suspicious of everyone else. Who could have been involved? Who had been looking the other way? The man behind the Toyota had said it went higher than the sheriff's department. How high? And who could they trust? His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop talking to the feds. You don't know what you're risking. Martinez stared at the message, then quickly screenshot it before it could disappear. Another piece of evidence, another threat. They were getting bolder or more desperate. He left the interrogation room and nearly collided with dispatcher Savannah Lewis in the hallway. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Cody," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "I need to talk to you. Not here. Tonight, after shift. The old Comstock Cemetery, midnight." Before he could respond, she was walking away, her shoulders tense. Martinez watched her go, unease growing in his stomach. Savannah had been the dispatcher on duty that night. She'd been the one who'd taken his calls, who'd sent backup. What did she know that she couldn't say in the department? The rest of the day passed in a blur of interviews, paperwork, and dodging reporters who'd gotten wind of the story. Deputy Schuetz, human trafficker in desert standoff, was the kind of headline that drew attention, especially with the ongoing search for Maria Gonzalez. Her face was on every news channel. Her family had driven in from Phoenix, and volunteers were combing the desert despite the brutal heat. As his shift ended, Martinez debated whether to tell someone about Savannah's request to meet. It could be important information she was afraid to share officially. Or it could be a trap. The paranoia that had infected the department was getting to him too. Finally, he decided to go, but take precautions. He'd record everything on his phone, and he'd make sure someone knew where he was. He texted Ramirez. "Following up on a lead tonight. Comstock Cemetery, midnight. If you don't hear from me by 1 a.m., send backup." Ramirez replied immediately. "Want me to come with?" "No. Better if I go alone, just be ready." The drive to Comstock took 30 minutes on dark, empty roads. The town, if you could call it that, was little more than a collection of old buildings clustered around a crossroads. The cemetery was on the outskirts. A small plot of land surrounded by a low stone wall, filled with weathered headstones dating back to the 1800s. Martinez parked outside the gate and waited, his service weapon within easy reach. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the darkness was almost complete. At exactly midnight, he saw headlights approaching. A vehicle parked next to his, and Savannah Lewis stepped out, looking around nervously. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who else to trust." "What's this about, Savannah?" She pulled out a manila envelope from her bag. "I've been keeping records. Calls that came in and were redirected. Reports that were filed and then disappeared. Suspicious patterns that everyone seemed to ignore. I think someone in the department has been helping them." Martinez took the envelope, feeling its weight. Who? I don't know for certain. But look at the dates, the times. Every time we got a call about suspicious activity on certain roads, the response time was delayed. Always the same dispatcher codes, always the same excuses. Vehicle trouble, wrong location given, mixed up addresses. But it was systematic, Cody. Someone was making sure certain areas weren't patrolled at certain times. He opened the envelope using his phone's flashlight to read. The documents inside were photocopies of dispatch logs, highlighted and annotated in Savannah's neat handwriting. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. Specific sections of the county, specific times, always kept clear of law enforcement. Jesus Christ, Martinez breathed. How long has this been going on? At least 2 years, maybe longer. That's as far back as I could check without raising suspicions. Savannah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warm night. There's more. The night you found Maria Gonzalez's car, I got a call about 10 minutes before you radioed in. Someone asking if any units were patrolling Highway 83. I told them yes, that you were out there. They hung up immediately. Did you recognize the voice? She shook her head. It was muffled, disguised, maybe. But Cody, it came from inside the department. The caller ID showed it as an internal extension. Before Martinez could respond, they both heard the sound of vehicles approaching fast, no headlights. His hand went to his weapon as 2 pickup trucks roared into the cemetery, skidding to a stop in a cloud of dust. Men jumped out, at least 4 of them, all armed. "Run!" Martinez shouted at Savannah, drawing his weapon. But there was nowhere to run. They were surrounded. A familiar voice called out from behind one of the trucks. "Lower your weapon, deputy. This doesn't have to end badly." Sheriff Colton Brooks stepped into view, his own service weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. Martinez felt his world tilt. Brooks had been sheriff for 15 years, had been his mentor, the man who'd hired him fresh out of the academy. "Sheriff?" Martinez kept his weapon raised, his mind racing. "You're part of this?" Brooks sighed, looking genuinely regretful. "It's not what you think, son. This is bigger than some trafficking ring. There are forces at play here you don't understand. National security, border control, operations that require flexibility." "Flexibility?" Martinez's voice was incredulous. "Is that what you call kidnapping innocent people?" "Innocent?" Brooks laughed bitterly. Maria Gonzalez wasn't innocent. She was a courier for the Zetas cartel, carrying information that could have compromised ongoing DEA operations. We had to intercept her. "So you had her killed?" "We had her detained. What happened after? That wasn't supposed to happen. The men you encountered, they went off script. They were supposed to just hold her until we could extract the information." Savannah spoke up, her voice shaking. "You're lying." "What about all the others? The patterns I found go back years." Brooks' expression hardened. "Ms. Lewis, you've stuck your nose where it doesn't belong. That's unfortunate." He nodded to his men. "Take them both. We'll figure out what to do with them later." Martinez made a split-second decision. He fired, not at Brooks, but at the nearest truck's tire, then grabbed Savannah and dove behind a large headstone as return fire erupted. Bullets chipped at the stone, whined overhead. He could hear Brooks shouting orders, trying to regain control of the situation. "My backup knows where I am," Martinez called out. "They'll be here any minute." "You're bluffing," Brooks replied. "But even if you're not, who do you think they'll believe? The respected sheriff or a deputy who's been under stress since a shooting, possibly having a mental breakdown, meeting secretly with a civilian in a cemetery." Martinez's phone buzzed. Ramirez. "On my way with state troopers. ETA 5 minutes. Recording everything on dash cam." Thank God for paranoid partners, Martinez thought. He just had to hold out 5 more minutes. He returned fire, conservative with his ammunition, trying to keep the attackers at bay. Beside him, Savannah was curled up, terrified, but admirably not hysterical. "You okay?" he asked her. She nodded, then suddenly pointed. "Look." One of the men was trying to flank them, moving through the headstones to their left. Martinez shifted position, fired 2 shots that sent the man scrambling back to cover. His ammunition was running low, maybe 6 shots left. "This is pointless, Cody," Brooks called out. "Even if you survive this, who's going to believe you? I've been sheriff for 15 years. I have connections throughout the state. You're just a deputy with a story that sounds insane." "Maybe," Martinez called back. "But I have evidence. Documents, recordings, testimony. People are going to start asking questions you can't answer, Sheriff." The sound of sirens in the distance made everyone freeze. Multiple sirens, getting closer fast. Martinez felt relief flood through him, but Brooks just laughed. "You think this ends here? You have no idea how deep this goes, son. Federal agencies, state government, people with the power to make you disappear or discredit everything you say. You're fighting a war you can't win." The first state trooper vehicle roared into the cemetery, lights blazing, followed by 2 more. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. For a moment, Martinez thought Brooks and his men might actually fight it out with the state troopers. But then Brooks slowly raised his hands, setting his weapon on the ground. "Stand down," he told his men. "We'll sort this out through proper channels." As the state troopers took Brooks and his men into custody, Sergeant William Hayes of the Texas Department of Public Safety approached Martinez and Savannah. Hayes was a veteran officer with 30 years on the job, and his expression was grim. "Deputy Martinez, Miss Lewis, we need to get you both somewhere safe. There's a lot to sort out here." "Did Ramirez tell you?" Martinez began. "Deputy Ramirez told us enough. And we've been conducting our own investigation into irregularities in this county for months. Your incident the other night accelerated our timeline." Hayes looked at the arrested men being loaded into vehicles. "This is going to get complicated. There are going to be a lot of questions, a lot of pressure from various directions. Are you prepared for that?" Martinez thought about Maria Gonzalez, still missing, probably dead. He thought about all the other victims suggested by Savannah's documentation. People who disappeared on lonely roads while someone in law enforcement looked the other way. "I'm prepared," he said. But he wasn't, not really. No one could be prepared for what came next. The Texas Rangers took over the investigation within 48 hours of Sheriff Brooks' arrest. The FBI, which had initially seemed so interested, suddenly withdrew, citing jurisdictional concerns and ongoing operational priorities. Deputy Cody Martinez found himself in a bureaucratic nightmare that made the physical danger he'd faced seem straightforward by comparison. He was placed on administrative leave, standard procedure during an investigation involving an officer-involved shooting and allegations against department leadership. But the standard investigation quickly became anything but. Martinez was assigned a protection detail after 2 attempts on his life, once when his apartment was firebombed, and again when a vehicle tried to run him off the road. He was moved to a safe house in Austin, 3 hours from Val Verde County, cut off from everything familiar. Savannah Lewis had it worse. Without the protection of a law enforcement badge, she was more vulnerable. After her car's brake lines were cut, discovered only because she noticed fluid pooling under her vehicle, she entered witness protection. The last time Martinez saw her was at a deposition in a nondescript federal building in San Antonio. "They're trying to break us," she said. Dark circles under her eyes, more pronounced than ever. "Death by 1,000 legal cuts. Discredit us, exhaust us, make us give up." She was right. The legal proceedings were labyrinthine. Brooks had hired a team of high-powered attorneys who challenged every piece of evidence, filed motion after motion, turned what should have been a straightforward case into a complex web of procedures and technicalities. Meanwhile, the media narrative was being carefully shaped. Stories began appearing suggesting Martinez had a history of mental health issues. He didn't. That Savannah had financial problems that might motivate false testimony. She didn't. That the whole incident was a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by overzealous prosecutors. 3 months after the cemetery confrontation, Martinez was called to testify before a closed grand jury. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Wyatt Carter, was young, ambitious, and clearly overwhelmed. "Deputy Martinez," Carter began, shuffling through his papers, "let's go through the events of October 15th one more time." "It was October 17th, Martinez corrected, not for the first time. These small errors were constant, and he'd begun to wonder if they were intentional, designed to undermine his credibility. "Right, of course. October 17th. Now, you claim you saw 3 men in the desert with what you believed was Maria Gonzalez. I don't claim it. I saw it. I reported it. It's in my official statement. But it was dark, you were 50 yards away, you were under stress. There was enough moonlight to see, and the truck's headlights illuminated the scene. I know what I saw." Carter nodded, making notes. "And Sheriff Brooks, you're alleging he was part of a conspiracy to traffic human beings across the border." "I'm not alleging anything. He admitted to being involved, said it was part of some national security operation. It's on the recording." "Ah, yes, the recording." Carter pulled out a transcript, which seems to have some gaps. Minutes of static at crucial moments. Martinez felt his frustration building. The recording has been authenticated by 3 different audio experts. The gaps are from interference, not tampering. Of course. But you can see how a jury might find it convenient that these gaps occur just when Sheriff Brooks allegedly makes his most incriminating statements. This was how it went, hour after hour. Every piece of evidence questioned, every testimony challenged, doubt layered upon doubt, until the truth seemed as unstable as desert sand. During a break, Martinez stepped outside for air and found Deputy Jose Ramirez waiting for him, in uniform but looking haggard. "Jose," Martinez said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Wanted to see how you were holding up." Ramirez glanced around nervously. "And to warn you. Things back home. They're not good." "What do you mean?" "The department's been taken over by the state. Half the deputies have been suspended or transferred. The other half are under investigation. Nobody trusts anybody. And Cody," he lowered his voice. "They found another body last week. Young woman dumped near the same area where you saw those men. She'd been dead for months, so not Maria Gonzalez, but this has been going on for a long time." "Any leads?" Ramirez shook his head. "The investigation is being handled by state authorities now. They're not sharing information with us locals, but there are rumors. Talk about a ranch near the border that's been used as a way station. Bodies supposedly buried all over the property. but nobody can get a warrant. The ranch is owned by some shell company with connections that go all the way to Washington. Before Martinez could respond, ADA Carter appeared in the doorway. Deputy Martinez were ready to resume. Ramirez gripped Martinez's shoulder. "Stay strong, brother. Some of us still believe in the truth." But as the weeks turned into months, the truth seemed increasingly irrelevant. Sheriff Brooks' trial was postponed repeatedly. Key witnesses disappeared or recanted their testimony. The federal investigation that had seemed so promising simply evaporated, with officials citing lack of actionable evidence and compromised chains of custody. The breaking point came 6 months after the initial incident. Martinez was called to a meeting with Texas Ranger Captain Samuel Morrison, the lead investigator on the case. They met in a hotel room in Austin, Morrison having insisted on a location away from any official buildings. Morrison was a tall, weathered man with 40 years of law enforcement experience. He looked tired, defeated in a way Martinez had never seen in a senior officer before. "I'm closing the investigation," Morrison said without preamble. Martinez felt like he'd been punched. "What? You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. And before you say anything, you need to understand something. This comes from above my pay grade. Way above." "So they win? Brooks walks free? The trafficking continues?" Morrison poured himself a whiskey from a bottle on the dresser, offered one to Martinez, who declined. "Brooks won't walk free. He's agreed to early retirement, full pension in exchange for his silence. The men you encountered in the desert, one's dead, you saw to that. The others have disappeared, probably across the border or in shallow graves somewhere. As for the trafficking," he took a long drink, "that's been shut down. The routes have been closed, the network disrupted. But not prosecuted, not exposed. No. Because to expose it would reveal connections that certain people don't want revealed. Federal agents who were taking bribes, state officials who were looking the other way, even some judges who were making sure certain cases never went to trial. The whole system is infected, Deputy. You pull one thread, the whole thing unravels, and suddenly you've got a scandal that makes Watergate look like a parking ticket." Martinez stood, pacing to the window. Outside, Austin's skyline glittered in the evening light, oblivious to the darkness being discussed in this room. "So, what am I supposed to do? Just forget what I saw? Forget about Maria Gonzalez and all the others?" "Maria Gonzalez is alive." Martinez spun around. "What?" Morrison nodded slowly. "She's in federal custody. Has been for months. Turns out Brooks was partially telling the truth. She was connected to cartel operations. But she was also a victim, forced to work for them after they kidnapped her sister. She's been providing intelligence in exchange for her and her sister's safety. Why wasn't I told? Because you were never supposed to know any of this. You stumbled into an operation that had been running for years. A devil's bargain between law enforcement and criminals. They helped us track terrorist threats crossing the border. We let them run their other operations with minimal interference. It was dirty, it was wrong, but it was deemed necessary by people with much more power than you or me." Martinez felt sick. Everything he'd believed about law enforcement, about justice, was crumbling. "So, I'm supposed to just accept this? Go back to work like nothing happened? No. You're supposed to take the offer they're making." Morrison pulled out an envelope, set it on the table between them. "Full disability pension, citing PTSD from the shooting incident. Enough to live on comfortably. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement and leave law enforcement." "And if I refuse?" Morrison's expression was grave. "Then the full weight of the federal government comes down on you. They'll find something to charge you with. Mishandling of evidence, violation of procedure, maybe even suggest you were involved in the trafficking yourself. They'll destroy your reputation, your finances, your life. And in the end, nothing will change except you'll be ruined. Martinez picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside was his future. Safe, comfortable, silent. Or he could fight and likely lose everything. What would you do? He asked Morrison. The older man finished his whiskey. 20 years ago, I'd have fought. 10 years ago, maybe. Now? I've seen too many good cops destroyed for trying to do the right thing. The system is bigger than any of us, Deputy. Sometimes survival is the best you can hope for. And the truth? The truth is a luxury we can't afford in this business. Not the whole truth, anyway. We deal in necessities, compromises, lesser evils. The truth would burn everything down. And despite all its flaws, the system does more good than harm. At least, that's what I tell myself to sleep at night. Martinez left that meeting with the envelope in his pocket and a decision to make. He thought about all the victims who would never get justice, all the criminals who would never face prosecution, all the corrupt officials who would continue in their positions. But he also thought about Savannah Lewis in witness protection, about his own family who could become targets, about the very real threat of having his life destroyed if he didn't comply. That night, he sat in his safe house apartment, the NDA spread out on the table before him, a pen in his hand. Outside, he could hear sirens in the distance, other cops racing to other crimes, believing they were making a difference, just as he once had. 5 years had passed since Deputy Cody Martinez signed the non-disclosure agreement and walked away from law enforcement. He'd moved to Houston, started a private security company, built a new life on the ashes of his old principles. The monthly disability checks came like clockwork, payment for his silence. He'd tried to convince himself he'd made the right choice. The only choice. Most days, he almost believed it. But the desert doesn't forget, and neither do the dead. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October, almost 6 years to the day since he'd found Maria Gonzalez's abandoned car on Highway 83. His phone showed a blocked number. He almost didn't answer. Blocked numbers were never good news. But something, call it instinct or fate, made him pick up. Deputy Martinez? The voice was female, familiar but changed, weathered by time and fear. I'm not a deputy anymore. Who is this? It's Savannah. Savannah Lewis. He sat up straighter, his heart rate accelerating. He hadn't heard from her since she'd entered witness protection. Savannah? Are you okay? I need your help, Cody. They're all dead. What? Who's dead? Brooks, Morrison, Carter, all of them. Everyone involved in covering up what happened. They've been dying one by one over the past year. Made to look like accidents or natural causes, but I know better, and I think I'm next. Martinez's mind raced. He'd heard about Brooks dying. Heart attack while fishing, according to the news. Morrison had died in a car accident 3 months ago. He hadn't known about Carter. Where are you? He asked. I can't say on the phone. But I need you to meet me. Tomorrow night, Del Rio, the place where it all started. Mile marker 122 on Highway 83. Midnight. Savannah, I know what it is. That's the point. Whatever's happening, it started there, and I think it needs to end there. Will you come? Every rational part of his brain screamed no. This had trap written all over it. But the part of him that had never really left that desert, that still woke up some nights thinking about the victims who never got justice, that part said yes. I'll be there. The line went dead. Martinez spent the next day preparing. He retrieved his personal weapon from his safe, a Glock 19 he'd carried as backup during his law enforcement days. He made copies of all his documents from the original case, uploaded them to multiple cloud servers, and sent sealed envelopes to 3 different attorneys with instructions to open them if he didn't contact them within 48 hours. If this was a trap, he wasn't walking into it blind. The drive from Houston to Del Rio took 8 hours. He left at noon, wanting to arrive early, to scout the location before the meeting. As he drove west, the landscape gradually shifted from urban sprawl to rural Texas, from green to brown, from populated to desolate. By the time he reached Val Verde County, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of red and gold that reminded him uncomfortably of blood. He reached mile marker 122 at 9 p.m., 3 hours before the scheduled meeting. The spot looked different in daylight, just another stretch of unremarkable highway. But as darkness fell, the memories came flooding back. There was the exact spot where Maria Gonzalez's car had been parked. There, the place where he'd entered the brush following those footprints. And somewhere out there in the darkness, the depression where he'd seen those men, where everything had started to unravel. He parked his truck off the road, partially hidden behind a cluster of mesquite, and settled in to wait. At 11:30, a car appeared on the horizon, driving slowly. It pulled over near the mile marker, and a figure got out. Even from a distance, he recognized Savannah's silhouette, though she moved differently now, cautious, constantly checking her surroundings. Martinez waited another 15 minutes, watching for any other vehicles, any sign of an ambush. When none came, he started his truck and drove to where she waited. She looked older, harder. Her blonde hair was now dark brown, cut short. She'd lost weight, and there was a haunted quality to her eyes that spoke of years spent looking over her shoulder. "Thank you for coming," she said as he got out of his truck. "You said everyone's dead." "What's going on, Savannah?" She pulled out a tablet from her bag. "After I went into witness protection, I didn't stop investigating. I couldn't. I kept digging, following money trails, tracking down witnesses, piecing together the full scope of what we'd stumbled into." She turned the tablet toward him, showing a complex web of connections. Names, dates, financial transactions. It was bigger than we ever imagined. The trafficking ring was just one part of a massive criminal enterprise involving drugs, weapons, even human organs. And it wasn't just Brooks. It went all the way up to... A shot rang out, and Savannah crumpled to the ground. Martinez immediately dropped behind his truck, drawing his weapon, scanning for the shooter. Another shot sparked off the truck's bumper. The shots were coming from the desert, the same direction he'd pursued those men 6 years ago. He grabbed Savannah, dragging her behind the truck. She was hit in the shoulder, bleeding badly, but alive. "Go," she gasped, pressing the tablet into his hands. "Everything's on there, evidence, names, proof. They killed the others to keep it quiet, but I made copies, distributed them. It's too late to stop it now, but they don't know that." "Who? Who's doing this?" Before she could answer, vehicles appeared from both directions on the highway, converging on their position. Martinez recognized a trap when he saw one. They'd both been lured here, but not by each other. He helped Savannah into his truck, started the engine, and floored it, heading off-road into the desert. The truck bounced over rocks and through bushes, headlights swinging wildly. Behind them, he could see pursuit vehicles following, gaining ground. "There's an old ranch road about 2 miles north," Savannah said through gritted teeth, her hand pressed against her shoulder. "Abandoned airstrip from the drug-running days. I have a plane there." "You have a plane?" "I've been preparing for this for 5 years. Turn left at that rock formation." He followed her directions, the pursuit vehicles falling slightly behind as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The abandoned airstrip appeared in his headlights, a strip of relatively flat ground with a small Cessna parked at one end. "Can you fly injured?" he asked as they reached the plane. "No choice." She climbed into the pilot's seat while he spun to face their pursuers, who were now close enough that he could see their headlights bouncing toward them. The plane's engine coughed to life. Martinez emptied his magazine toward the approaching vehicles, not really hoping to hit anything, just trying to buy time. Return fire shattered the truck's windows, and he felt a round tug at his shirt sleeve. "Get in!" Savannah shouted. He jumped into the passenger seat as she began taxiing down the rough strip. The plane bounced and shuddered, engine straining. One of the pursuit vehicles tried to cut them off, but Savannah pulled back on the yoke at the last second, and they were airborne, barely clearing the vehicle's roof. For a moment, Martinez thought they'd made it. Then he heard the engine sputter. "They hit the fuel line," Savannah said, her voice eerily calm. "We're losing fuel fast. I can maybe get us 20 miles. That's not enough. It'll have to be." She pulled out a satellite phone, handed it to him. "Speed dial 1. Tell them code 7. They'll know what to do." He made the call as she fought to keep the dying plane in the air. Below, the desert stretched out in the darkness, vast and unforgiving. The engine coughed again, then died completely. They were gliding now, losing altitude fast. "There." Savannah pointed to a relatively flat area ahead. "Hold on." The landing was more of a controlled crash. The plane hit hard, bounced, hit again, and finally skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust. Martinez's head hit the dashboard, and for a moment he saw stars. When his vision cleared, he saw Savannah slumped over the controls, unconscious or worse. He checked her pulse, weak but present. The bullet wound in her shoulder was bleeding freely. He used his shirt to create a pressure bandage, then looked at the tablet she'd given him. Still intact, still powered on. He opened the files, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The conspiracy went beyond anything they'd imagined. Federal judges, congressmen, DEA agents, Border Patrol officials, hundreds of names, all connected to the trafficking network. But more than that, there was evidence of a systematic cover-up after the fact. The people who'd been dying weren't being killed by the criminals. They were being eliminated by a black ops team trying to clean up the mess to prevent a scandal that would destroy public faith in law enforcement. Sheriff Brooks hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd been poisoned. Morrison's car accident had been caused by remotely hacking his vehicle's computer. Carter had supposedly committed suicide, but the crime scene photos on the tablet showed clear signs of staging. They were tying up loose ends, and Savannah had been next on the list. The sound of vehicles approaching made him look up. 3 SUVs were converging on their position, having followed the plane's trajectory. Martinez took Savannah's pistol from her shoulder holster, checked the magazine, full, and prepared to make his last stand. But the vehicles that arrived weren't the pursuit team. They bore federal license plates, and the agents who emerged wore FBI windbreakers. The lead agent, a tall black man with graying temples, approached with his hands visible, non-threatening. "Deputy Martinez? I'm Special Agent Coleman. We're here to help." "How do I know you're not part of the cover-up?" Coleman smiled grimly. "Because if we were, you'd already be dead. Ms. Lewis contacted us 3 months ago with evidence of the cleanup operation. We've been investigating quietly, building a case. We were supposed to meet her tomorrow to take her into protective custody, but it seems someone forced her hand. The shooters, already in custody. We had teams standing by once we realized what was happening. Ms. Lewis was right to be paranoid. There was a kill order on both of you, issued by someone, very high up in Homeland Security, who was trying to prevent their involvement in the original conspiracy from coming to light." Paramedics were now working on Savannah, stabilizing her for transport. Martinez handed Coleman the tablet. Everything's on there. Names, dates, financial records, even recordings of some of the meetings. Coleman took it carefully, like it was a holy relic. This is the break we've been waiting for. With this, we can bring down the whole network, including the cleanup crew. Will it stick this time? Or will it disappear like before? This time is different. We have an attorney general who's not connected to any of this, and more importantly, we have public attention. Ms. Lewis was smart. She leaked just enough to journalists to ensure this can't be buried. The story's going to break nationally within 48 hours. There's no stopping it now. Martinez looked at Savannah being loaded into a medical helicopter. She was pale but conscious now, giving him a weak thumbs up. He thought about the 6 years of silence, the weight of the secrets he'd carried, the victims who'd never gotten justice. "What happens to me?" he asked Coleman. "I signed an NDA. NDAs aren't valid when they're used to cover up criminal activity. You're going to be a key witness, Mr. Martinez. Your testimony, combined with Ms. Lewis's evidence, will ensure that everyone involved faces justice. The real justice this time, not some backroom deal." As the helicopter lifted off with Savannah aboard, Martinez stood in the desert where it had all begun, surrounded by federal agents who were finally, truly, on the side of justice. The sun was rising in the east, painting the desert in soft pastels, so different from the harsh shadows of that night 6 years ago. His phone rang. It was Jose Ramirez. "Cody, I just saw the news. They're arresting people all over the state. Even got a federal judge in handcuffs. Is this real?" "It's real, Jose. It's finally real." "Are you okay?" Martinez thought about it. For the first time in 6 years, he could answer honestly. "Yeah, I think I am." The cleanup would take months, maybe years. Trials, testimonies, media circuses. His life would be disrupted again. His new business would probably fail, and he'd likely need protection for a while. But Maria Gonzalez and all the other victims would finally get justice. The truth, the whole truth, would finally come out. As he climbed into the FBI vehicle to be taken for debriefing, Martinez took one last look at the desert stretching out toward the horizon. It looked peaceful in the morning light, almost beautiful. But he knew better. The desert kept its secrets well, but not forever. Eventually, everything buried in the sand comes to light. The vehicle pulled away, heading back toward civilization, toward courtrooms and cameras and the complex machinery of justice. Behind them, the desert returned to its eternal silence, disturbed only by the wind and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead, watching, waiting, remembering. In the end, it had taken 6 years, multiple deaths, and 2 people willing to risk everything. But the truth had survived. It had been buried, threatened, nearly destroyed. But like those footprints Martinez had followed into the brush that night, it had led eventually to revelation. The last entry in Savannah's files, which wouldn't be discovered until weeks later during the investigation, was a simple note. For all the victims who never made it home, for all the families who never got answers, for all the officers who tried to do right, this is for you. The truth doesn't always win, but sometimes if we're brave enough and lucky enough, it gets its day in court. The trials would last for 3 years. Over 200 people would be indicted, including 3 federal judges, 7 congressmen, and dozens of law enforcement officials at every level. The trafficking network would be completely dismantled, its routes closed, its operators imprisoned or dead. Maria Gonzalez would testify, finally free from both the cartel and the government that had used her as a pawn. She would meet Martinez afterward, thank him for that night in the desert when he'd chosen to follow those footprints rather than wait for backup. Deputy Cody Martinez would return to law enforcement, not as a patrol officer but as a trainer, teaching new recruits about the importance of following their instincts, of choosing courage over comfort, of understanding that sometimes the system they serve might be the very thing they need to fight against. He would tell them about that night on Highway 83, about the choices he made and the ones he wished he'd made differently. But most importantly, he would tell them about the cost of silence, the weight of secrets, and the redemptive power of truth, even when it comes years too late. The desert, he would say, remembers everything. And sometimes, if you're listening carefully enough, it will tell you its secrets. You just have to be brave enough to follow where they lead, even if it's into the darkness, even if you're alone, even if the whole world is telling you to look away. Because in the end, that's what separates the law enforcement officers who merely do their job from those who truly serve justice. The willingness to walk into the desert, to follow those footprints, to face whatever horror waits at the end of the trail. And sometimes, just sometimes, to emerge on the other side with the truth intact, ready to finally see the light of day. The last thing Martinez would always tell his recruits, the thing that would stay with them through their careers, was simple. The badge doesn't make you righteous. The uniform doesn't make you just. Those are just symbols. What makes you a real officer is the choice you make when you're alone in the darkness, when no one's watching, when doing the right thing might cost you everything. That's when you find out who you really are. That's when you decide whether you're serving the law or serving justice. They're not always the same thing. Choose wisely, the desert remembers. And now, finally, so would everyone else. When the third child disappeared, Officer Isabella Torres had only been working at the Cedar Ridge Police Department for 18 months. Cedar Ridge, Texas, a town of 8,743 people, was located in a hilly region between Austin and San Antonio. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else, where Friday night football was almost like a religion, and where people's understanding of crime didn't extend beyond things like spray painting graffiti on the water tower, or someone getting excessively drunk at the VFW hall. The first disappearance had been in March. 8-year-old Dylan Hoffman, last seen walking home from Cedar Ridge Elementary on a Tuesday afternoon. His backpack was found 3 days later near the old Brackenridge School, abandoned since 1987 after a fire gutted the main building. The search had been exhaustive. Volunteers, state troopers, even a helicopter from Austin. But Dylan was never found. The second was in May. 9-year-old Sofia Martinez vanished from her own backyard while her mother was inside making dinner. The family's dog was found whimpering at the back gate, which hung open despite being locked from the inside. Again, the only clue was a single shoe discovered near the Brackenridge property, as if pointing toward that decaying monument to Cedar Ridge's past. Now, it was September 14th, a Friday that had started like any other until the call came in at 3:47 p.m. Another child missing. 7-year-old Mason Brooks, who'd been playing at the park adjacent to the library, and simply vanished while his older sister was reading on a bench less than 50 feet away. Torres was first on scene, arriving at Memorial Park to find a crowd already gathering. Parents clutching their own children tighter, whispers spreading like wildfire through the small community. She found Mason's sister, 14-year-old Ashley Brooks, sitting with the library director, tears streaming down her face. "I only looked away for a minute," Ashley kept repeating. "I was reading, and when I looked up, he was just gone. I called for him, but..." Torres knelt beside the girl, keeping her voice gentle but professional. "Ashley, I need you to think carefully. Did you see anyone else in the park? Anyone who seemed out of place?" Ashley shook her head, then paused. There was a man. He was sitting on the bench by the playground earlier. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, but he didn't have any kids with him. I thought that was weird, but then he left, maybe 20 minutes before Mason. Can you describe him? White guy, maybe 40 or 50. He had on work clothes, like a janitor or maintenance person would wear. Gray shirt, dark pants. Oh, and he had this keychain that made a lot of noise when he walked. It had tons of keys on it. Torres made notes, her mind already racing. A maintenance worker with a large set of keys. In a small town like Cedar Ridge, that narrowed it down to maybe a dozen people. She radioed for backup and began organizing the search, but a cold dread was already settling in her stomach. 3 children in 6 months, all vanishing without a trace, all with connections to that abandoned school. By evening, the search was in full swing. Chief William Garrison, a 30-year veteran who'd been talking about retirement since Torres arrived, commanded the operation from the police station while officers and volunteers combed through the town. Torres found herself paired with Detective Ray Hutchinson, a transplant from Dallas who'd moved to Cedar Ridge for the slower pace 5 years ago. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Hutchinson asked as they searched the wooded area behind the park. "The Brackenridge School," Torres replied. "Every disappearance has some connection to it. We need to search it properly this time." We did search it. After the first 2 kids went missing, we went through every room. Then we missed something. As darkness fell, the official search was called off until morning, but Torres couldn't let it go. She drove to the Brackenridge School, its hulking silhouette visible against the star-filled Texas sky. The building sat on 10 acres at the edge of town, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had been cut and repaired so many times it was more patch than original. The main structure was 3 stories of red brick and broken windows, with 2 smaller outbuildings that had once housed the gymnasium and cafeteria. Torres parked outside the fence and called Hutchinson. "Meet me at Brackenridge. Bring flashlights and the bolt cutters. Torres, we should wait for... A 7-year-old boy is missing, Ray. Every hour matters." 20 minutes later, they stood before the main entrance, the door hanging off its hinges from years of neglect and teenage vandalism. The interior smelled of mold and decay, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness to reveal graffiti-covered walls and debris-strewn floors. "Let's split up," Hutchinson suggested. "Cover more ground." "No," Torres said firmly. "We stick together." Something about this place. They methodically searched the first floor. Empty classrooms with overturned desks, a library stripped of books, administrative offices with filing cabinets yanked open and papers scattered like snow. Nothing suggested recent human presence beyond the usual signs of teenage trespassers. The second floor was more of the same, but as they climbed to the third floor, Torres noticed something odd. The dust on the stairs had been disturbed recently, and not just by random foot traffic. There was a pattern to it, a path worn through the grime as if someone had been coming up here regularly. At the end of the third-floor hallway, they found a door that shouldn't have been there. It was newer than the others, metal rather than wood, with a modern deadbolt lock that gleamed in their flashlight beams. "This wasn't here during the last search," Hutchinson said. "I'm sure of it." Torres examined the door frame. Fresh tool marks showed where it had been recently installed, the wood splintered and raw. Someone's been renovating. Hutchinson tried the handle, locked, of course. Should we call for backup? And tell them what? We found a locked door? Torres pulled out her lockpick set, a skill she'd learned from her brother, who'd had a checkered past before joining the army. "Keep watch." It took her less than 3 minutes to defeat the lock. The door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase leading up. to what should have been the roof. But as they climbed, they realized someone had built an addition, a hidden fourth floor that wouldn't be visible from the ground. The stairs opened into a single, large room, and what they found there made both officers freeze. The space had been converted into a twisted version of a classroom. Children's desks were arranged in neat rows facing a blackboard. The walls were covered with children's drawings, hundreds of them, depicting houses and families and pets. A bookshelf held dozens of children's books, and toys were scattered in a play area in one corner. But it was the 3 beds against the far wall that made Torres's blood run cold. 3 small beds, neatly made, with stuffed animals on the pillows. "Jesus Christ," Hutchinson whispered. Torres was already on her radio, calling for immediate backup and a full forensic team. As she spoke, she noticed something else: a calendar on the wall with dates circled in red. March 15th, May 22nd, September 14th. The dates the children had disappeared, and another date circled: September 21st, 1 week from today. "He's not done," she said. "He's planning to take another—" A sound from below made them both freeze. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, measured, accompanied by the jingle of keys. They drew their weapons, positioning themselves on either side of the doorway. The footsteps stopped just outside. "Cedar Ridge Police," Torres called out. "Come out with your hands visible." Silence. Then a voice, calm and pleasant, almost grandfatherly. "Officers, you don't understand. You're ruining everything. They're happy here. They're safe here. Sir, we need you to show yourself. Hands where we can see them. Their parents don't appreciate them. Don't protect them. The world out there, it's dangerous for children. But here, in my classroom, they can learn and play and be children forever." Torres and Hutchinson exchanged glances. The man was clearly delusional, but that made him more dangerous, not less. "We just want to talk," Torres said, trying to keep him engaged while backup raced toward them. "Why don't you come up and explain? Help us understand." "You won't understand. No one does. They all said I couldn't teach anymore, that I was unfit. 30 years of dedication, and they threw me away like garbage. But I showed them. I created a better school, a perfect classroom where the children are always eager to learn, always safe." The pieces were clicking together in Torres's mind. A former teacher, someone who'd been removed from their position who'd never accepted it. Someone with access to the abandoned school, with keys. "You're Carl Jennings," she said suddenly, "the janitor at the elementary school." There was a pause. "Custodial engineer," the voice corrected. "And yes, I was Mr. Jennings once, when I taught 5th grade, before they decided I cared too much, that my methods were inappropriate. As if loving children and wanting to protect them could ever be inappropriate. Mr. Jennings, where are the children? Where are Dylan and Sophia and Mason? They're safe. They're in the special place where no one can hurt them, where they'll never grow up to be disappointed by the world." Torres felt her stomach drop. The way he was talking, the past tense. "Mr. Jennings, we need to see them. We need to know they're okay." "You can't see them. No one can. They're mine now, my perfect students who will never leave me, never grow up to forget me like all the others did." The sound of sirens reached them, still distant but approaching. Jennings must have heard them too because his tone changed, becoming agitated. "You've ruined it. You've ruined everything. It was perfect, and you've destroyed it." They heard him running down the stairs. Torres and Hutchinson gave chase, but by the time they reached the main floor, Jennings had vanished into the maze of corridors and classrooms. They could hear him somewhere in the building. the jingle of his keys echoing off the walls, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Backup arrived within minutes. Chief Garrison, 4 other officers, and a K-9 unit. They surrounded the building while Torres and Hutchinson briefed them on what they'd found. "We need to find those kids," Garrison said, his weathered face grim. "Torres, you said he mentioned a special place. Any idea what that means?" Torres thought back to Jennings' words. "He said they were somewhere no one could hurt them, where they'd never grow up. The way he said it." She paused, not wanting to voice her fear. "You think they're dead," Garrison said flatly. "I hope I'm wrong." They searched the building systematically, room by room, floor by floor. The K-9 unit picked up Jennings' scent but lost it near the basement stairs. It wasn't until they brought in thermal imaging equipment that they discovered the truth. The basement had a sub-basement, accessed through what looked like a solid wall but was actually a cleverly concealed door. The space below was a maze of storage rooms and maintenance tunnels, part of the original 1920s construction that had been sealed off and forgotten when the school was modernized in the 1960s. The air was stale and thick, their flashlights barely penetrating the darkness. They found Jennings in a boiler room, sitting calmly on an overturned bucket, his hands folded in his lap. He was exactly as Ashley Brooks had described. Middle-aged, graying, unremarkable, except for the enormous ring of keys at his belt. He looked up as they entered, his expression serene. "Mr. Jennings," Torres said, weapon drawn but pointed down. "Where are the children?" He smiled, a sad, distant expression. "They're in the eternal classroom now, where they'll always be perfect, always be innocent." "Where?" Torres's voice was sharp. "Where is the eternal classroom?" Jennings tilted his head, studying her. "You're young. You don't have children yet, do you? You don't understand the heartbreak of watching them grow up, grow away from you, become strangers. My own daughter, she hasn't spoken to me in 15 years, says I was too controlling, too protective, but I was just trying to keep her safe, keep her mine. The children you took weren't yours to keep," Hutchinson said. Their parents failed them," Jennings suddenly shouted, his calm facade cracking. "Dylan's mother, working 2 jobs, never home. Sophia's parents always fighting, talking about divorce right in front of her. And Mason, poor Mason, with a father who cares more about his poker games than his son's soccer matches. I gave them attention, structure, love." "Where are they?" Torres repeated. Jennings's smile returned. "You'll never find them. I made sure of that. They're in a place where time stops, where childhood lasts forever." It took 3 more hours of searching before they found it. Behind the boiler room, through a narrow maintenance tunnel, was another room. A sealed concrete chamber that had once been a cistern. Jennings had installed a heavy steel door with multiple locks, all requiring different keys from his massive collection. When they finally got it open, the smell hit them first. Not death, as Torres had feared, but something else. Chemicals, formaldehyde. The beam of her flashlight illuminated something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The 3 children were there, but not as they'd hoped to find them. Jennings had preserved them, created his eternal classroom in the most horrific way imaginable. They stood in grotesque poses, dressed in school uniforms, positioned around child-sized desks as if frozen in the middle of a lesson. Their eyes were glass now, their skin waxy and artificial. Torres stumbled backward, fighting the urge to vomit. She heard Hutchinson curse, heard Chief Garrison on the radio calling for the medical examiner, heard the other officers' shocked exclamations. But it all seemed distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. Jennings, now in handcuffs, was brought to see what they'd found. His expression was proud, loving, as he gazed at his macabre creation. "Aren't they beautiful?" he said. "Forever young, forever perfect. They'll never know heartbreak or disappointment. They'll never grow old or forget the lessons I taught them. This is love, Officer Torres. This is what real love looks like." Torres turned away, unable to look at him or his classroom any longer. She walked out of the building into the Texas night, where parents and volunteers still waited for news, still hoped for miracles. She thought about having to tell them, having to explain that their children had been found but would never come home, never grow up, never be anything more than props in a madman's twisted fantasy. The next hours were a blur of procedure, securing the scene, processing evidence, dealing with the media frenzy that descended on Cedar Ridge like vultures. Jennings was charged with 3 counts of capital murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. He showed no remorse during his arrest processing, speaking calmly about his teaching methods and his special students, as if he'd done nothing wrong. The news of what Carl Jennings had done spread through Cedar Ridge like a plague. Within 24 hours, the small town was swarming with reporters, camera crews, and morbid tourists hoping to catch a glimpse of the House of Horrors, as the national media had dubbed the Brackenridge School. The 3 families were in seclusion, trying to process a grief that had no precedent, no roadmap for healing. Officer Isabella Torres hadn't slept in 48 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that room, those children frozen in their eternal tableau. She'd been placed on mandatory administrative leave, standard procedure after such a traumatic discovery. But she couldn't rest. Something was nagging at her, some detail that didn't fit. She was sitting in her small apartment, staring at the case files she wasn't supposed to have, when her phone rang. It was Detective Hutchinson. "Torres, you need to hear this. I just got a call from Austin PD. They ran Jennings's prints through the national database. He's connected to similar cases in New Mexico and Oklahoma. Same M.O., children disappearing, bodies later found preserved." Torres sat up straighter. "When?" New Mexico was 15 years ago. Oklahoma was 8. In both cases, he was working at local schools under different names. He was never charged. Insufficient evidence in New Mexico and in Oklahoma. Another man confessed and was convicted. The other man's confession is being reviewed. Looks like he might have been coerced. Torres, this goes back further than we thought. And there's something else. Remember how Jennings said his daughter hadn't spoken to him in 15 years? I found her. Emma Jennings Reeves lives in Houston now. She's willing to talk to us. Against protocol, but with Chief Garrison's unofficial blessing, Torres and Hutchinson drove to Houston the next day. Emma Jennings Reeves lived in a modest suburban home with her husband and 2 teenage sons. She was in her mid-30s with the same gray eyes as her father, but none of his unsettling calm. "I've been expecting this call for 20 years, she said, serving them coffee in her living room. Her hands shook slightly. When I saw the news, saw his face, I knew. I've always known this day would come. "Ma'am, can you tell us about your father?" Torres asked gently. Emma took a deep breath. "He wasn't always wrong. When I was very young, he was a wonderful father, attentive, loving, involved. He was a teacher then, at Prairie View Elementary in Lubbock. The kids loved him. He'd stay after school to help struggling students, organized weekend camping trips, started a chess club. Everyone said he was the best teacher they'd ever had. What changed? My brother died." Emma's voice was flat, emotionless in the way of old, scarred-over pain. "Tommy was 8. leukemia. It took him slowly, over 2 years. Dad couldn't handle it. He became obsessed with preserving things, took thousands of photos of Tommy, recorded hours of his voice, kept every toy, every piece of clothing. After Tommy died, Dad had him, specially prepared. Wanted to keep him at home, said Tommy would want to be with family. Mom finally had to get a court order to have Tommy properly buried. Torres and Hutchinson exchanged glances. The pathology was becoming clearer. Emma continued. After that, Dad changed. He became fixated on his students, especially the boys who reminded him of Tommy. He'd follow them home, take pictures, show up at their extracurricular activities. Parents complained. The school board ordered a psychological evaluation. He failed it spectacularly. Diagnosed with complicated grief disorder and delusional tendencies. They fired him, banned him from school property. That must have been devastating for him, Hutchinson said. It broke him completely. He tried to get jobs at other schools, but word had gotten out. That's when we moved to New Mexico. He used Mom's maiden name, Carlson, and got a job as a janitor. Mom thought being around children in a limited capacity might help him. We didn't know. She paused, collecting herself. There was a boy who went missing. Joshua Tanner, 8 years old, same age Tommy had been. Dad was questioned, but they never found evidence. We moved again 6 months later. Mom left him after that, took me with her. I was 13. The last time I saw him was at the custody hearing. He looked at me like I was betraying him, like I was choosing to abandon him just like Tommy had by dying. Did he ever try to contact you? Torres asked. Every year on Tommy's birthday and death day. Letters at first, talking about how Tommy was still with him, how he'd found a way to keep children safe forever. I stopped reading them, started returning them unopened. The last one came 5 years ago. The postmark was from Cedar Ridge. Emma stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a box. I kept them all. I don't know why. Maybe I knew someday they'd be evidence. She handed the box to Torres. There are photos, too. Pictures he sent of children I didn't recognize. I should have gone to the police, but he was still my father, and I hoped, that maybe they were just students from whatever school he was working at. Torres opened the box, her heart sinking. Dozens of photos of children, all between 7 and 10 years old. Some she recognized, the 3 victims from Cedar Ridge, taken months or even years before their disappearances. He'd been watching them, selecting them, planning. Miss Reeves, Hutchinson said carefully, did your father ever mention any other locations? Places he might have kept things. Emma's face paled. Oh God, the storage units. He was obsessed with storage units. Said they were perfect for preserving memories, keeping things safe from time and decay. He had one in every town we lived in. Some he kept even after we moved. He'd drive hundreds of miles just to visit them, to check on his treasures, he'd say. Torres felt her pulse quicken. Do you have any documentation? Receipts? Keys? Anything? No, but wait. Emma pulled out her phone, scrolled through old emails. Here. 5 years ago, he asked me to take over payments for a storage unit if anything happened to him. Said it contained family heirlooms he wanted me to have. I never responded, but he sent the information anyway. It's in Kerr County, about an hour from Cedar Ridge. They left Houston immediately, calling Chief Garrison on the way. Within 2 hours, they had a warrant and were standing in front of Unit 47B at Kerr County Self-Storage, a sprawling facility on the outskirts of Kerrville. The manager, a nervous man named Pete, cut the lock with bolt cutters. The smell hit them first, not death, but something chemical, sweet and cloying. The unit was meticulously organized, with shelving units along all 3 walls. Each shelf held sealed containers, carefully labeled with dates and names. Some names Torres recognized from missing persons cases going back decades. In the center of the unit was a workstation, embalming tools, chemicals, detailed anatomical charts, and journals. Hundreds of journals filled with Jennings' neat handwriting, documenting his preservation techniques and his philosophy of eternal childhood. One journal entry, dated just a month ago, read, "The 3 students are adjusting well to their eternal classroom. They no longer resist the lessons. They are perfect now, as all children should be, frozen at the moment of peak innocence, before the world can corrupt them. I am not a killer. I am a savior. I preserve what parents carelessly allow to slip away." But it was the back wall that revealed the true horror. Behind a false panel, they found more preserved children. 7 of them, ranging in age from approximately 6 to 11, posed in a grotesque mockery of a family portrait. Some had been there for years, based on the degradation. Others were more recent. "Christ," Garrison said when he arrived. "How did nobody notice? How did he transport them? How did—" "He had 30 years to perfect his methods," Torres said, reading from one of the journals. "He writes about it here, using his janitor access to scout victims, learning their routines. He'd take them during transitions, walking home, playing in yards, moments when supervision was minimal. He had a van registered under false names, different plates he'd swap out. He'd use sedatives he stole from veterinary clinics where he'd briefly worked. Everything planned, everything meticulous. The investigation expanded exponentially. FBI, Texas Rangers, authorities from 5 states. Over the next weeks, they would find 4 more storage units, containing a total of 19 preserved children. Some had been missing for so long their cases had gone cold. Their families had given up hope or moved away or died, never knowing what happened. Torres was assigned as liaison to the multi-agency task force, her intimate knowledge of the Cedar Ridge cases making her invaluable despite her junior status. She threw herself into the work, partly because it needed to be done, partly because staying busy kept the nightmares at manageable levels. 3 weeks into the expanded investigation, she received a call that changed everything. It was from a woman named Patricia Navarro in El Paso. "Officer Torres? I saw your name in the news about the Jennings case. I think my daughter might be one of his victims, but she's not dead. She can't be. I still get postcards from her." Torres felt her blood run cold. "Postcards? Every month for the past 2 years since she disappeared. They say she's happy, she's safe, she's learning so much. They're in her handwriting, or close enough. The police here said she ran away, that the postcards prove she's fine. But after seeing what this man did..." Torres got Patricia's information and drove to El Paso that night. Patricia's daughter, Rosa, had disappeared 2 years ago at age 9. The postcards were real, dozens of them, all with different postmarks from around Texas, all containing brief messages about being happy and loved. The handwriting was consistent, if somewhat stilted. "Look at this one," Patricia said, pointing to a recent card. She mentions her favorite doll, Mr. Bunny, but Rosa's favorite doll was named Princess Sophie. She'd never call any toy Mr. Bunny. And here, she says she misses my chocolate chip cookies. I'm allergic to chocolate. We never had it in the house. Torres studied the postcards. Something about them felt wrong beyond the factual errors. The handwriting was too consistent, too perfect, as if someone was tracing or copying rather than naturally writing. She took photos of all the postcards and drove through the night back to Cedar Ridge. In Jennings' house, which had been thoroughly searched but not yet released from evidence, She found what she was looking for in his home office: a light box for tracing, samples of children's handwriting, and practice sheets where he'd been copying their styles. But more importantly, she found a ledger with addresses. Not storage units, but residential properties. 3 of them, scattered across rural Texas. Properties owned by shell companies that traced back to fake identities Jennings had cultivated over the years. She called Hutchinson immediately. "Ray, I think some of them might still be alive." The first property was a ranch house 40 miles northwest of Cedar Ridge, isolated on 50 acres of scrubland. The tactical team assembled at dawn: state troopers, FBI, local law enforcement, and emergency medical personnel on standby. Torres and Hutchinson were there as advisors, their investigation having brought them to this point. The house looked abandoned from the outside: peeling paint, overgrown yard, windows covered with aluminum foil. But the satellite imagery had shown recent tire tracks, and the power company confirmed the electricity was not only on, but usage was high for a supposedly empty residence. The entry was swift and professional. "Police! Search warrant!" echoed across the property as officers breached front and back simultaneously. The main floor was empty, dusty, showing no signs of recent habitation. But in the basement, they found evidence of Jennings's presence: more journals, chemical supplies, and a locked door that looked recently installed. Behind it was a 12-year-old girl named Rebecca Patterson, reported missing from Oklahoma 3 years ago. She was alive, but in a catatonic state, unresponsive to the officers' attempts at communication. She'd been kept in a room designed to look like a child's bedroom circa 1950, complete with vintage toys and books. A feeding tube and IV suggested she'd been kept sedated for extended periods. The paramedics rushed her to the hospital while the search continued. They found evidence that at least 2 other children had been held there recently, but they were gone now, moved sometime in the last week. "He knew we were coming," Torres said, studying the scene. "Someone warned him." The second property, near the Louisiana border, was a complete bust. It had been cleared out, sanitized. Only the lingering smell of bleach and some child-sized clothing in a burn barrel out back suggested it had been used at all. The third property was different. It was an old farm compound in Huntsville, with a main house and several outbuildings. As they approached, they could see lights on despite it being midday, and there was a van in the driveway, the same type witnesses had described seeing near several disappearance sites. This time, they set up a perimeter first, thermal imaging showing at least 4 heat signatures inside the main house. 2 were child-sized. "We go in quiet," the tactical commander decided. "We don't know if Jennings has accomplices, if he's armed, or what state the children are in." Torres was stationed at the command post, monitoring radio traffic, when she heard something that made her blood freeze. "We have movement. Someone's coming out. Christ, it's a kid." Through the binoculars, she could see a young boy, maybe 8 years old, walking out the front door. He moved strangely, mechanically, like a sleepwalker. He was carrying something. It looked like a tea tray. "Do not approach," the commander ordered. "Could be a trap." But Torres was already moving, her instincts overriding protocol. She knew that walk, that blank expression. She'd seen it in the videos they'd found at Jennings' house, recordings of his teaching sessions where drugged children performed tasks like robots. "He's drugged," she called into her radio. "He won't respond to commands." "I'm going in." She approached slowly, hands visible, speaking softly. "Hey there, buddy. I'm Officer Torres. You're safe now." The boy didn't react, just continued his mechanical walk toward a picnic table in the yard. As Torres got closer, she could see his pupils were dilated, his movements precise but unconscious. He set the tray down and turned to walk back to the house. Torres gently caught his arm. "Let's not go back inside, okay? Let's wait out here." The boy blinked, seemed to see her for the first time. "I have to serve the tea," he said in a monotone. "Mr. Carl says good students always serve tea at 3 o'clock. "Mr. Carl isn't here right now," Torres lied. "He asked me to take care of you." "What's your name?" "Timothy." Timothy. The name hit Torres like a punch. He'd been missing from Austin for 6 months. His parents had been on the news pleading for information. "Okay, Timothy. You're doing great. Are there other students inside?" "Sarah's inside. She's sick. She won't wake up for lessons." The tactical team was already moving, using Timothy's exit as their entrance opportunity. Torres heard the chaos over the radio. "Clear! Clear! Got one, basement, need medical." As they swept the house, they found Sarah Martinez, age 7, missing for 2 weeks from San Antonio. She was unconscious, heavily sedated, but alive. They also found evidence of a complex drug regimen: sedatives, hallucinogens, medications that induced compliance and memory suppression. Jennings had been experimenting with creating perfectly obedient students who would never resist, never try to leave, never grow beyond his control. But Jennings himself was gone. Again. It was Hutchinson who noticed the pattern. Look at the timing. Rebecca was moved from the first property about a week ago, just before we got the warrant. The second property was cleared out 3 days ago, right after we found her. And now Jennings is gone from here, probably left this morning based on the warm coffee in the kitchen. Someone's telling him our moves. Torres felt sick. Someone in law enforcement. Has to be. Someone with access to our investigation. Someone who knows when warrants are being issued, when raids are being planned. The investigation turned inward. Every person with access to the task force information was scrutinized. Phone records were pulled, financial statements examined, polygraphs administered. It was during this process that they found their leak, not through evidence but through absence. Deputy Marcus Rodriguez of the Cedar Ridge PD had called in sick the day of each raid. His phone record showed calls to burner phones just hours before each property was hit. When they went to arrest him, they found his house empty, cleaned out in a hurry. Rodriguez's bank records revealed large cash deposits over the past year, far exceeding his deputy's salary. Further investigation showed he'd been one of the officers who'd searched Brackenridge School after the first disappearances, and had somehow missed the hidden 4th floor that Torres and Hutchinson had found easily. He wasn't just warning Jennings, Chief Garrison said, his face gray with exhaustion and shame. He was helping him, covering his tracks, misdirecting searches, making sure certain areas were overlooked. They tracked Rodriguez to a motel on the Mexican border. He was arrested, trying to cross with a fake ID and $50,000 in cash. Under interrogation, he broke within hours. Jennings had photos, Rodriguez said, not meeting anyone's eyes. From before I was a cop, when I was young and stupid. Photos that would have ruined my life, my marriage, my career. He said he just needed someone to keep an eye out, make sure he wasn't bothered. I didn't know about the kids at first. When I found out, I was in too deep. He said if I turned him in, he'd make sure I went down too. Said he had evidence I'd helped kidnap those children. Where is he now? Torres demanded. I don't know, I swear. He contacts me, not the other way around, but... Rodriguez paused, seeming to weigh his options. He mentioned something about the first classroom. Said if everything fell apart, he'd go back to where it all began. Emma Jennings Reeves, when contacted again, knew immediately what that meant. Prairie View Elementary in Lubbock, where he taught before Tommy died. It's been closed for 5 years, scheduled for demolition. He always talked about it as his happiest time, his perfect place. The Lubbock raid was massive. 50 officers, FBI hostage rescue team, ambulances, fire trucks, media held back by barriers. Prairie View Elementary sat in a declining neighborhood, its windows boarded, playground equipment rusted and broken. But someone had been there recently. Fresh tire tracks, a cut in the fence expertly repaired. They entered simultaneously from all directions. The school was larger than Brackenridge, a sprawling single-story complex with multiple wings. They found signs of habitation immediately: sleeping bags, food supplies, chemical equipment. And in what had once been the kindergarten wing, they found Jennings' masterpiece. He'd recreated his original classroom down to the smallest detail. The same posters on the walls, the same arrangement of desks, even the same goldfish bowl, though the fish were long dead. And sitting at those desks were 6 children, ranging in age from 6 to 11. They were alive but completely unresponsive, dressed in matching school uniforms, their eyes open but seeing nothing. Jennings was at the teacher's desk, calmly grading papers as if it were just another school day. He looked up when the officers entered, weapons drawn, screaming commands. "Quiet, please," he said mildly. "You'll disturb the students. They're taking a test." "Carl Jennings, you're under arrest," Torres said, approaching carefully. "Step away from the desk and put your hands on your head." "I can't do that, officer." "Class isn't over yet. We still have story time, then art class, then dismissal. I never leave before dismissal. That would be irresponsible. The children need medical attention. They need to go to the hospital." Jennings' face darkened. "Hospital?" "Number. Hospitals are where children go to die, like Tommy. I won't let that happen again. These children are safe here. They're learning, they're happy, they're eternal." He reached for something under his desk. Multiple officers fired simultaneously. Jennings fell backward, his hand clutching not a weapon but a photograph. A class photo from his teaching days with Tommy in the front row, smiling. As paramedics rushed to treat the children, trying to reverse the effects of whatever cocktail of drugs Jennings had given them, Torres stood over his body. He was still alive, barely, blood pooling beneath him. "They're safe now," he whispered, looking past her at something only he could see. "Tommy's safe. They're all safe. Forever." He died before the ambulance arrived. 6 months after Carl Jennings died on his classroom floor, Cedar Ridge was still trying to heal. The town had been forever changed, marked by tragedy in a way that no amount of time could fully erase. The Brackenridge School had been demolished, the ground blessed by clergy from every denomination in town. A memorial garden planted where the building once stood. 3 trees for Dylan, Sophia, and Mason, and 19 more for the other victims discovered across Texas. Officer Isabella Torres stood in that garden on a cool March morning, exactly 1 year after Dylan Hoffman had disappeared. She wasn't a patrol officer anymore. The Jennings case had led to her promotion to detective, the youngest in Cedar Ridge history. But the achievement felt hollow. She'd solved the case, saved 7 children who were still alive, but 22 were dead. 22 children whose families would never see them grow up, graduate, get married, have children of their own. The surviving children were complicated. Rebecca Patterson, the girl found in the first property, had slowly emerged from her catatonic state but suffered from severe PTSD and dissociative disorders. She could remember only fragments of her 3 years in captivity, and those memories came as nightmares that left her screaming. Timothy had recovered more fully, the shorter duration of his captivity and younger age working in his favor. But he still sometimes asked when Mr. Carl would come back to finish the lesson. Sarah Martinez hadn't spoken a word since her rescue. The 6 children found in the Lubbock classroom had varying degrees of recovery. 2 had been so heavily drugged for so long that the damage to their developing brains was permanent. They would need lifetime care. The others were in intensive therapy, slowly learning to distinguish reality from the elaborate fantasy world Jennings had created in their drugged minds. Torres was pulled from her thoughts by footsteps on the garden path. She turned to see Detective Ray Hutchinson approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Figured I'd find you here," he said, handing her a cup. "It's been a year." "A year since Dylan," Torres corrected. "The others, their anniversaries are still coming." They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the young trees struggling to establish themselves in the Texas soil. "Rodriguez's trial starts next week," Hutchinson said. "They want you to testify." Marcus Rodriguez, the deputy who'd helped Jennings evade capture, was facing charges of accessory to murder, obstruction of justice, and child endangerment. His lawyer was claiming coercion, that Jennings had blackmailed him. But the prosecution argued that regardless of his initial motivation, Rodriguez had enabled the continued kidnapping and murder of children. "I'll testify," Torres said. "Those families deserve to know the whole truth, even the ugly parts about one of our own." Speaking of truth, Hutchinson pulled out his phone. "Emma Jennings Reeves sent this to the department. She wanted you to see it." It was a video message. Emma looked healthier than when they'd interviewed her, though the sadness in her eyes remained. "Detective Torres, I wanted to thank you for everything you did. For not giving up, for finding the truth even when it was horrible. I also wanted you to know that I'm starting a foundation in Tommy's name. My brother, not my father. It will provide counseling and support for families affected by child abduction. Something good has to come from all this pain." Torres felt tears prick her eyes. In the months since Jennings' death, she'd corresponded regularly with Emma, who struggled with the guilt of not reporting her suspicions earlier. They'd formed an unexpected bond, both women trying to make sense of a senseless evil. "There's something else," Hutchinson said carefully. "Chief wants to see you, says it's urgent." They walked to the police station, a 5-minute journey through downtown Cedar Ridge. The town was trying to return to normal. Kids walked to school again, though never alone. Parents still clutched their children a little tighter. The local elementary had hired 2 new security guards and installed a state-of-the-art surveillance system. Fear had become part of the town's DNA. Chief Garrison was in his office with 2 people Torres didn't recognize, a man and woman in federal suits. "Detective Torres, these are Special Agents Franklin and Martinez from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. They have some information about Jennings that, well, you need to hear it from them." Agent Franklin, a tall black man with kind eyes, gestured for Torres to sit. "Detective, in reviewing Jennings' history, we've discovered something disturbing. More disturbing, I should say, we don't believe he worked alone for his entire career." Torres felt her stomach drop. "Rodriguez?" "Not Rodriguez," Agent Martinez interrupted. She was younger, intense, with the focused energy of someone who'd seen too much. "Rodriguez was a recent tool, not a partner. We're talking about someone who's been involved since the beginning. Someone who helped Jennings develop his preservation techniques, who may have even inspired them." Franklin pulled out a tablet, showed Torres a photograph from the 1990s. It was Jennings, much younger, standing next to another man at what appeared to be a medical conference. "Dr. Howard Ashford," Franklin said. "Pediatric physician, researcher in preservation techniques for organ donation, and Jennings' brother-in-law. Married to Jennings' sister until she died in 2001. He was also Tommy Jennings' doctor during his leukemia treatment." Torres studied the photo. Ashford was unremarkable, thin, balding, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. You think he was involved in the murders? We know he was involved in something, Martinez said. After Jennings' death, we've been combing through everything. Every journal, every receipt, every phone record. Jennings references H repeatedly in his early journals. H taught me the proper chemicals. H says the temperature must be exact. H understands the importance of preservation. Where is Ashford now? Torres asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Missing, Franklin said. Has been for 3 weeks, right around the time you found the first storage unit. His house in Dallas is empty, his bank accounts drained, his car found at the airport but no record of him taking a flight. There's more, Martinez added. She pulled up a map on the tablet, red dots scattered across 5 states. These are unsolved disappearances of children matching Jennings's victim profile. Age 6 to 11, vulnerable families last seen in public spaces. But they're from areas Jennings never lived or worked. However, Dr. Ashford attended medical conferences in every one of these cities within 6 months of each disappearance. The implications were staggering. How many more victims? How many more preserved children waiting to be found in storage units or hidden properties? We need you on the task force, Franklin said. You know Jennings's methods better than anyone. You can help us understand how he thought, which means you can help us understand how Ashford thinks. Torres looked at Chief Garrison, who nodded. It's your choice, Detective. But these families deserve answers, and those children, if any are still alive, deserve to be found. She thought about the 6 months since Jennings' death, the nightmares that had slowly faded to once a week instead of every night, the therapy sessions where she'd finally started processing the trauma. Taking this case would mean diving back into that darkness, possibly for years. But she also thought about Timothy, who'd recently sent her a drawing he'd made in art therapy. A police officer standing between a child and a shadow, with "Thank you, Detective Torres," written in crayon at the bottom. She thought about the 19 families who'd finally been able to bury their children. She thought about Dylan, Sophia, and Mason, whose parents had at least gotten closure, horrible as it was. "When do we start?" she asked. The task force headquarters was set up in Austin, a nondescript office building with high security and no signs indicating its purpose. Torres was one of 12 investigators from various agencies, all chosen for their experience with crimes against children or serial offenders. The evidence room was a shrine to horror. Thousands of documents, hundreds of photographs, dozens of preserved specimens that Ashford had apparently been collecting for decades. Unlike Jennings, who'd been driven by trauma and delusion, Ashford appeared to be motivated by something else entirely. He's a collector, the task force's psychological profiler explained during a briefing. Jennings saw himself as a protector, a teacher. He created elaborate fantasies about eternal childhood and perfect preservation. Ashford is different. To him, these children are specimens, objects to be cataloged and studied. His journals read like scientific papers, completely devoid of emotion. They'd found 3 of Ashford's storage units so far, each containing preserved remains and meticulous documentation. But unlike Jennings's theatrical displays, Ashford's victims were stored efficiently, labeled with case numbers rather than names. The preservation techniques were more advanced, more clinical. Some of the bodies had been subjected to experimental procedures that turned Torres's stomach to read about. "He's escalating," Agent Martinez observed during one late-night session. Or rather, he was escalating before he disappeared. The most recent victims show more extensive experimentation. He was pushing boundaries, trying new techniques. Trying to achieve what? Torres asked. Perfect preservation. Not just of the body, but of everything. Look at these notes from his last journal. Subject 47 maintained neural activity for 73 hours post-mortem with new chemical compound. Minor cellular degradation, but within acceptable parameters. He was trying to preserve them at the moment of death. Possibly even maintain some kind of biological function after death. The search for Ashford consumed months. Every lead was followed, every connection explored. They discovered he'd been using Jennings as a test subject for his theories, feeding him ideas and techniques while staying safely in the shadows. When Jennings was exposed, Ashford had immediately gone underground. The break came from an unexpected source. A librarian in Amarillo called the tip line to report a man matching Ashford's description who'd been coming in regularly to use the computers, always wearing gloves, always paying cash for printing services. He'd been printing medical journals about experimental preservation techniques and organ donation procedures. The Amarillo lead led them to a rundown motel on Route 66, where Ashford had been living under the name Howard Smith. But by the time they arrived, he was gone again, leaving behind only a few receipts and a partial fingerprint on a medical journal about cryonic preservation. One receipt was for a climate-controlled storage facility in New Mexico, just across the state line. The task force mobilized immediately, converging on the facility with full tactical support. Unit 19 was larger than the others they'd found, a double-sized space that Ashford had been renting for 8 years under various aliases. When they opened it, they found Ashford's life's work. 17 children, all preserved with techniques far beyond what Jennings had ever achieved. Some looked like they could have been sleeping if not for the unnatural stillness, the waxy perfection of their skin. But in the back, they found something else. A sophisticated medical setup, complete with monitoring equipment, IV stands, and a surgical table. And on that table, connected to various machines and tubes, was a child. A living child. 10-year-old Marcus Thompson had been missing for 6 days from Albuquerque. He was unconscious, his vital signs maintained by machines, his body temperature lowered to near hypothermic levels. The medical team that rushed in couldn't immediately understand what Ashford had done to him. It was some combination of induced coma, hypothermia therapy, and experimental drugs that had essentially paused his biological functions. It took 3 days to safely bring Marcus back. When he finally woke up, he had no memory of his abduction or captivity. The last thing he remembered was walking home from school. Everything after that was gone, erased by whatever cocktail of drugs Ashford had given him. They finally caught Ashford 2 weeks later at another storage facility in Nevada, where he'd apparently gone to retrieve supplies. He didn't resist arrest, didn't try to run. He simply stood there as they cuffed him, his expression one of mild irritation, as if they'd interrupted an important experiment. During interrogation, Ashford was utterly without remorse or emotion. He spoke about the children as if they were lab rats, referring to them by numbers, discussing their preservation status and cellular integrity with clinical detachment. "You don't understand the importance of my work," he told Torres during one session. "Death is simply a state of cellular dysfunction. With the right techniques, the right chemicals, we can prevent that dysfunction indefinitely. These children are proof of concept." "They were people," Torres said, fighting to keep her voice level. "They had families, lives, futures." "They have eternity now," Ashford replied. "In 100 years, when preservation technology advances, they could potentially be revived. I've given them immortality. You've given them death. Death is a matter of perspective, detective. To you, they're gone. To me, they're simply paused, waiting for science to catch up to my vision." The trial of Dr. Howard Ashford became a media sensation that dwarfed even the Jennings case. The prosecution presented evidence of 23 murders across 6 states spanning 15 years. The defense tried to argue insanity, but psychological evaluations showed that while Ashford was clearly sociopathic, he understood the nature and consequences of his actions. He just didn't care. He was sentenced to death. An irony that wasn't lost on anyone. The man obsessed with preventing death would face it himself. But even on death row, Ashford continued his research, requesting medical journals, writing elaborate papers on preservation techniques that prison officials eventually stopped allowing him to send out. Torres visited him once, 6 months after his conviction. She needed closure, needed to understand how someone could be so devoid of human empathy. "Detective Torres," Ashford greeted her pleasantly, as if they were colleagues meeting for coffee. "How is young Marcus Thompson? I read that he made a full recovery. No thanks to you." "On the contrary, entirely thanks to me. My techniques kept him in perfect suspension. Another few days and the process would have been irreversible. But as it stands, I proved that human beings can be placed in a state of suspended animation and successfully revived. You tortured and killed 23 children. I advanced the science of preservation by decades. Those children's sacrifice. Torres stood, unable to listen anymore. They didn't sacrifice anything. You stole their lives, their futures, their everything. You and Jennings, you're not researchers or protectors. You're monsters who found a way to dress up your evil in fancy words." Ashford studied her with those cold, emotionless eyes. "In 50 years, when medical science has advanced to the point where death is optional, I'll be remembered as a pioneer. You'll be a footnote, the small-minded detective who couldn't see the bigger picture." Torres left without another word. She had her answer. There was no understanding someone like Ashford because there was nothing to understand. He was a void where empathy should be, a brilliant mind completely disconnected from humanity. The aftermath of the Ashford case led to significant changes in how missing children cases were investigated. The Federal Child Protection Act, nicknamed Dillon's Law after Dillon Hoffman, mandated information sharing between agencies and required immediate federal involvement when children disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Storage facilities were required to conduct regular inspections and report suspicious activity. Torres returned to Cedar Ridge, to her position as detective in a small town still healing from unimaginable trauma. She could have taken positions with the FBI, with state police, with any number of agencies that wanted her expertise. But Cedar Ridge was home now, bound to her by shared grief and slow recovery. She established a cold case unit, small but dedicated, reviewing disappearances going back decades. Using what she'd learned from the Jennings and Ashford cases, she found patterns others had missed. In her first year, she solved 3 cold cases, bringing closure to families who'd given up hope. The memorial garden grew and evolved. Every spring, the families of Jennings' victims gathered for a remembrance ceremony. The 3 trees planted for Dillon, Sophia, and Mason were thriving now, their branches reaching toward the sky. The 19 trees for the other victims had also taken root, creating a small grove of memory and mourning. But it wasn't all grief. Timothy had started school again, was making friends, laughing. Rebecca Patterson, while still struggling, had begun to speak at survivor support groups, her voice growing stronger with each telling. Even Sarah Martinez had finally spoken. Just one word, "Mama," but it was a beginning. Detective Ray Hutchinson, promoted to lieutenant, often found Torres in the garden during her lunch breaks. "You know, we did good work," he said one day, 2 years after Jennings' death. Horrible as it was, we stopped them. We saved lives. Torres nodded, watching a butterfly land on one of the memorial trees. We did, but the cost was going to be paid whether we acted or not. The only question was, how many would pay it? Because of you, because of your instincts that night at Brackenridge, 7 children are alive who wouldn't be. That matters. She knew he was right. But knowledge and feeling were different things. The weight of the 23 who couldn't be saved would always be with her, along with the images that could never be unseen, the horrors that couldn't be forgotten. Her phone rang. Another case, another missing child, another race against time. She answered it, already moving toward her car, because that was the job. That was the calling. Not to prevent all evil, that was impossible. But to stand against it, to fight it wherever it appeared, to be the thin blue line that really did separate order from chaos, safety from predation. The Jennings-Ashford case, as it came to be known in law enforcement circles, became required study at the FBI Academy. It demonstrated how predators could hide in plain sight, how systemic failures could enable monsters, and how determined investigation could unravel even the most complex crimes. But for Torres, it was simpler than that. It was about 23 children who deserved justice, and 7 who deserved saving. It was about doing the job even when it broke your heart, especially when it broke your heart. As she drove toward the new case, she passed the elementary school where Carl Jennings had worked as a janitor. They'd hired new staff, implemented new security measures, done everything possible to ensure it could never happen again. But Torres knew the truth. Evil would always find a way. The best they could do was remain vigilant, remain dedicated, and never forget that behind every statistic was a child, a family, a life that mattered. The radio crackled with updates about the new missing child case. A 6-year-old boy, last seen at a park. The familiar dread settled into Torres's stomach, but alongside it was determination. She'd found Dylan, Sophia, and Mason too late, but she'd found Timothy and Sarah and the others in time. Maybe this time she'd be fast enough. Maybe this time the ending would be different. As she drove through Cedar Ridge, past the Memorial Garden, past the rebuilt elementary school, past all the places marked by tragedy and recovery, she made the same promise she made every day. To the children she couldn't save, she would remember. For the children she could save, she would never stop trying. And for the monsters who preyed on innocence, she would be their reckoning, their ending. The detective who would follow their trail wherever it led, no matter how dark the path. The sun was setting over Cedar Ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere, a child was waiting to be found. Somewhere, a family was praying for a miracle. And somewhere between hope and horror, Detective Isabella Torres was racing toward another confrontation with the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men, armed with nothing but her badge, her gun, and the hard-earned knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. But even victories in this war came with a price, and as she drove toward whatever horror awaited, she carried with her the faces of 23 children who would never grow up, 7 who would never be the same, and the terrible understanding that in places like Cedar Ridge, innocence wasn't lost. It was stolen, preserved, and transformed into nightmares that would echo through generations. The radio crackled again. They'd found something. Torres pressed harder on the accelerator, racing against time, against evil, against the falling darkness. This was her life now, her purpose, her burden. She was the guardian at the gate, the detective who'd seen the worst of humanity and still chose to fight. In Cedar Ridge, the memorial trees continued to grow, their roots deep, their branches reaching toward tomorrow. They stood as testament to lives cut short but also to the dedication of those who sought justice, who refused to let evil win, who understood that every child saved was a victory against the darkness. And in the gathering dusk, Detective Isabella Torres drove on, toward another case, another chance to make a difference, another opportunity to prove that while evil might be creative and persistent, good was relentless, and justice, however delayed, would eventually find its way home. Logan Pierce, who had been working for the Presidio County Sheriff's Department for 12 years, had never witnessed anything like what would happen that scorching August morning at Garrison Ranch. At 5:47 a.m., he received a call from the ranch foreman, Hector Valdez. With a strange tone in his voice, Valdez reported that several cattle had been found dead under unnatural circumstances. Pierce drove his patrol vehicle down the dusty private road that led to the ranch, located 45 miles from the nearest town in the harsh landscape of far west Texas. The Garrison Ranch sprawled across 50,000 acres of desert and scrubland, a working cattle operation that had been in the same family for 4 generations. As he approached the main compound, he could see several ranch hands gathered near the eastern pasture, their faces grim. Hector Valdez met him at the gate, a weather-beaten man in his 60s who'd worked the ranch for 30 years. Pierce had known him since childhood. Hector was as steady and unflappable as they came, which made his obvious distress all the more concerning. "Deputy Pierce," Hector said, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow despite the early morning hour. "Thank you for coming quickly. You need to see this yourself. I don't have words for it." They walked together toward the pasture, passing under the metal arch that read, "Garrison Ranch, established, 1892. The other ranch hands parted as they approached, revealing a scene that made Pierce stop in his tracks. 3 cattle lay dead in the dirt, but these weren't ordinary deaths. The animals had been mutilated with surgical precision. Their eyes had been removed cleanly, leaving perfect circular cavities. The tongues were gone, cut out at the root. Most disturbing of all, large sections of hide had been removed in perfect rectangles, the underlying tissue exposed but showing no signs of bleeding. "Jesus Christ," Pierce muttered, crouching beside the nearest carcass. "When did you find them?" "About an hour ago," Hector replied. "I was doing the morning count when I noticed the buzzards circling. But here's the strange thing. The buzzards won't come down. They're circling, but they won't feed. And look at the ground around the bodies." Pierce examined the dirt carefully. There were no tracks, no human footprints, no vehicle marks, no signs of struggle. The cattle appeared to have simply dropped dead where they stood, then been mutilated by someone or something that left no trace of its presence. "Have you had any predator problems lately?" Pierce asked, though he knew no predator could make such precise cuts. "Nothing unusual. Occasional coyote, but they don't do this. Deputy, I've been working cattle my whole life. I've seen what predators do, what disease does, even what people do when they're stealing beef. This isn't any of those things." Pierce stood, dusting off his hands. "I need to call this in. We're going to need a veterinarian out here, maybe someone from the state agricultural department. Has Mr. Garrison been notified? He's in Houston on business. I called him right after I called you. He's driving back now." Pierce returned to his vehicle to radio dispatch. As he waited for a response, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the distance, near the northern boundary of the visible pasture, he could see more dark shapes on the ground. More dead cattle. By noon, the Garrison Ranch had become a crime scene unlike anything Presidio County had ever seen. 17 cattle in total had been found dead and mutilated, scattered across different pastures but all killed and altered in the same methodical way. Dr. Rachel Morrison, the county veterinarian, had arrived along with Sheriff Jake Coleman and 2 investigators from the Texas Department of Agriculture. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Morrison said, her voice tight with confusion and concern. "The cuts are incredibly precise, almost surgical. No tearing, no rough edges. Whatever tool was used, it was sharp enough to cut through hide and tissue like butter. And there's no blood. These animals should have bled out, but there's virtually no blood at the scene." "Could they have been killed elsewhere and dumped here?" Sheriff Coleman asked. He was a big man, former Marine, not easily rattled, but Pierce could see the unease in his eyes. "That's the thing. These animals died here. You can see from the way they fell, the position of the bodies. But they didn't struggle. It's like they just stopped living. Then someone came along and did this to them." Thomas Garrison arrived in the late afternoon, his expensive truck kicking up dust as he pulled into the ranch compound. He was in his 50s, tall and lean with prematurely gray hair, dressed in a business suit that looked out of place among the ranch hands and law enforcement. Pierce had dealt with him a few times over the years. Garrison was wealthy, influential, and used to getting his way. "Sheriff Coleman," Garrison said, his tone clipped. "I want to know who did this to my cattle, and I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." "We're investigating, Mr. Garrison," Coleman replied. "But this is unusual. We're exploring all possibilities." "Unusual?" "This is deliberate destruction of property. These were prime breeding stock, worth thousands of dollars each. Someone came onto my land and—" He was interrupted by a shout from one of the ranch hands. "Mr. Garrison, we found something else." They followed the hand, a young man named Diego, to a storage shed near the main barn. The door was ajar, the padlock cut cleanly through. Inside, they found something that shifted the entire investigation. The shed had been converted into some sort of makeshift laboratory. Tables were covered with veterinary equipment, scalpels, bone saws, specimen jars. The walls were lined with detailed anatomical charts of cattle, horses, and other livestock. Most disturbing were the photographs pinned to a bulletin board. Dozens of images of mutilated animals from what appeared to be different ranches, different times. "This has been going on for a while," Pierce said, studying the photos. Some looked recent, others appeared to be years old based on the photo quality. "Someone's been documenting this." Sheriff Coleman turned to Garrison. "Who has access to this shed?" "All the ranch hands, but it's supposed to be for equipment storage. I haven't been in here in months." Garrison's face was pale. "You're saying someone who works for me did this?" Before anyone could answer, Hector spoke up from the doorway. "Mr. Garrison, there's something else. Miguel hasn't shown up for work in 3 days. He was supposed to be watching the eastern pastures." "Miguel Santos?" Garrison asked. "He's worked here for what, 2 years?" "About that, yes." "Good worker, quiet, kept to himself. Lives in the bunkhouse with the other hands." Sheriff Coleman immediately organized a search of the bunkhouse. Miguel Santos's room was sparse. A bed, a small dresser, a few personal items. But under the bed they found a journal filled with strange symbols and diagrams, along with detailed notes about the cattle on the ranch, their movements, their routines. One entry, dated a week earlier, read, "The convergence approaches. The offering must be perfect. 17 for the first phase, blessed under the blood moon. They will come as promised. They will take what was agreed." "What the hell does that mean?" Coleman muttered. Pierce felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. "Sheriff, last night was a full moon. Some folks call it a blood moon when it has that reddish tint. They issued an APB for Miguel Santos, but something told Pierce they wouldn't find him easily." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, the investigation took another turn. Diego, the young ranch hand who'd found the shed, approached Pierce privately. "Deputy, I need to tell you something, but I'm scared." "What is it, son?" "Miguel. He wasn't alone. There were others who would come to the ranch at night. I saw them a few times when I couldn't sleep. They'd meet out by the old windmill, maybe 5 or 6 of them. They'd stand in a circle and I could hear them talking, but not in English or Spanish. Something else." "When was the last time you saw this?" 2 nights ago, the night before the cattle were killed. They were out there for hours, and I swear I saw lights in the sky above them. Not airplane lights, something else. Something that moved in ways that didn't make sense." Pierce wanted to dismiss it as imagination, but the fear in Diego's eyes was real. "Can you show me where?" As darkness fell, Diego led Pierce and Sheriff Coleman to an old windmill about a mile from the main compound. Even in the fading light, they could see the ground had been disturbed. A large circle had been carved into the earth, with symbols at cardinal points that matched those in Miguel's journal. "We need to get everyone off this ranch," Coleman said quietly. "Something's not right here." But before they could act on that instinct, screams erupted from the direction of the bunkhouse. They ran back to find chaos. Ranch hands pointing at the sky, some falling to their knees in prayer, others running for their vehicles. Above the ranch, approximately 200 feet in the air, hung 3 lights in a triangular formation. They weren't moving, just hovering silently, casting an eerie glow over the buildings below. Pierce had seen aircraft, weather balloons, drones. This was none of those things. The lights were too bright, too steady, and completely silent. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the lights shot upward at impossible speed and vanished into the night sky. "Everyone remain calm," Sheriff Coleman shouted, though his own voice betrayed his unease. "I want everyone in the main house now." As the ranch hands hurried to comply, Pierce noticed something that made his stomach drop. 3 of them were missing: Roberto Jimenez, Carlos Mendoza, and Juan Delgado. They'd been standing right there moments ago, but now they were gone. A search of the immediate area turned up nothing. No tracks, no signs of struggle, no indication of where the 3 men had gone. They had simply vanished. Thomas Garrison, his composure finally cracked, grabbed Coleman's arm. "What the hell is happening on my ranch, Sheriff?" "I don't know, Mr. Garrison, but we're going to find out." "Pierce, call for backup. I want every available officer out here, and someone get me the number for the FBI field office in El Paso." As Pierce made the calls, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something far beyond their training or experience. The mutilated cattle, the makeshift laboratory, the missing ranch hands, the lights in the sky. It all pointed to something that defied rational explanation. But he was a law enforcement officer, sworn to protect and serve, and regardless of what they were facing, he had a job to do. As more patrol cars began arriving at the ranch, their lights cutting through the darkness, Pierce prepared himself for what promised to be the longest night of his career. By midnight, the Garrison Ranch looked like a military operation. FBI agents from El Paso had arrived along with state troopers, border patrol units who were in the area, and even a helicopter with thermal imaging capability. The media had somehow gotten wind of the story, and news vans were being held at the ranch entrance by a police barricade. Special Agent Marcus Flynn from the FBI had taken charge of the scene. He was a tall, severe-looking man with piercing blue eyes and an economy of movement that suggested military training. Pierce had been assigned to brief him on everything that had occurred. "Let me make sure I understand," Flynn said, his voice neutral. "You have 17 mutilated cattle, a makeshift laboratory, 4 missing ranch workers, including this Miguel Santos, unexplained aerial phenomena, and no physical evidence of who or what is responsible. That's the summary, yes, Pierce replied. I know how it sounds. Deputy Pierce, I've been investigating cattle mutilation cases across the Southwest for 5 years. What you're describing fits a pattern we've been tracking. The precision of the cuts, the missing blood, the lack of tracks. We've seen this before. You have? Then you know what's causing it. Flynn's expression darkened. We have theories. None of them are comforting. Tell me about Miguel Santos. What do you know about his background? Pierce pulled out his notebook. According to employment records, he's 32, originally from Chihuahua, Mexico. Came to work here 2 years ago with good references from other ranches. No criminal record that we can find. Hector says he was a good worker, but kept to himself. Did he have any unusual interests? Books, artifacts, anything related to indigenous religions or folklore?
Actually, yes, Pierce remembered. In his room, besides the journal, there were several books on pre-Columbian mythology and what looked like Aztec or Mayan symbols. Flynn nodded as if this confirmed something. Deputy, what I'm about to tell you is classified, but given the situation, you need to know. We believe there's a cult operating across the Southwest that believes they can communicate with, let's call them non-terrestrial entities. They perform rituals involving livestock mutilation as offerings. The missing organs and blood are supposedly part of these rituals. You're talking about aliens? Pierce couldn't hide his skepticism. I'm talking about people who believe in aliens, Deputy. Whether their beliefs have any basis in reality is another question entirely. What matters is that they're dangerous and they're organized. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. One of the missing ranch hands, Juan Delgado, had been found. He was discovered walking along the ranch's access road, disoriented and mumbling incoherently. As the medical team examined him, Pierce and Flynn tried to question him. Juan, where have you been? Pierce asked in Spanish, as Juan's English was limited. Juan's eyes were unfocused, dilated. The sky opened, he said in Spanish. They took us up into the light. Roberto and Carlos are still there. They're showing them things, terrible things. Who took you? Flynn pressed. Was it Miguel? Were there others? Not Miguel. The ones Miguel serves. The ancient ones who come from the stars. They've been here before, long before. The ancestors knew them, made pacts with them. Juan grabbed Pierce's arm with surprising strength. They're coming back. Tonight. They want the rest of the offering. The medical team sedated Juan before they could get more information. Initial examination showed no signs of physical trauma, but blood tests would later reveal the presence of unknown compounds that didn't match any known drugs or toxins. As they processed this development, Hector Valdez approached with an elderly woman Pierce didn't recognize. She was dressed in traditional clothing, her face deeply lined with age, her dark eyes sharp and alert. Deputy Pierce, Sheriff Coleman, Hector said. This is my mother, Rosa Valdez. She has something you need to hear. Rosa spoke in Spanish, her voice strong despite her age. I have lived in this region for 87 years. My grandmother told me stories her grandmother told her about this land. This ranch sits on what the old ones called Tierra Maldita, cursed earth. Every 52 years, they return. The Star Walkers. They take their tribute and leave. 52 years? Flynn interjected. That's a significant number in Mesoamerican calendars. Rosa nodded. The last time was 1972. 17 cattle found dead. 3 men vanished, never seen again. Before that, 1920. Same thing. The Garrison family has owned this land through all of it, but they don't remember or choose not to. Sheriff Coleman looked skeptical. Ma'am, with all due respect, we're dealing with a criminal investigation here, not folklore. You saw the lights, Rosa said simply. You have seen what they can do. This is not about what you believe, Sheriff. This is about what is. Miguel Santos knew the old ways. His grandmother was a curandera, a healer who knew the ancient pacts. He came here deliberately to fulfill the obligation. What obligation? Pierce asked. The pact made by the first peoples who lived here. Protection in exchange for tribute. But the Garrison family broke the pact when they took this land. They didn't know, didn't understand. Now the tribute must be paid in full, or... She trailed off, crossing herself. Before anyone could respond, the lights returned. This time, there were more of them. 7 lights in formation, moving slowly across the ranch. The helicopter that had been circling immediately moved to intercept, its spotlight trying to illuminate whatever was producing the lights. The radio crackled with the pilot's shocked voice. Control, I can't... There's nothing there. The lights are just lights. No craft, no source, just lights in the air. And my instruments are going crazy. Altimeter says I'm at sea level, but I'm at 3,000 feet. Compass is spinning. I need to land immediately. As the helicopter made an emergency descent, the lights suddenly descended as well, hovering directly over the barn where the cattle were kept. A low humming sound filled the air, felt more than heard, vibrating through everyone's bones. Then the screaming started. From inside the barn came the sounds of cattle in absolute terror. Ranch hands ran toward the building but stopped short as the doors burst open and cattle stampeded out in blind panic. But it was what came after the cattle that made hardened law enforcement officers reach for their weapons. 3 figures emerged from the barn, but calling them figures was generous. They were tall, perhaps 7 feet, thin to the point of being skeletal, with elongated limbs that moved in ways that seemed to violate basic anatomy. Their skin, if it could be called that, was a mottled gray that seemed to shift and change in the light. But it was their faces, or lack thereof, that was truly disturbing. Where features should have been, there was only smooth flesh with 2 dark indentations that might have been eyes. "Nobody move!" Sheriff Coleman shouted, his hand on his weapon but seemingly unable to draw it. The figures stood perfectly still for a moment, their heads turning in unison to survey the assembled humans. Then one of them raised what might have been an arm, and everyone within 50 feet collapsed to their knees, overcome by a pressure in their heads that made thought impossible. Pierce fought against it, his vision blurring, his nose beginning to bleed. Through the pain, he saw Miguel Santos walk out from behind the figures. But it wasn't quite Miguel. His movements were too fluid, his eyes completely black, his expression vacant. "The tribute is incomplete," Miguel said, but his voice was wrong, layered, as if multiple people were speaking through him. "The pact must be honored." 7 more are required. Thomas Garrison, who had been watching from the main house, suddenly strode forward, seemingly unaffected by whatever force had dropped the others. "Get off my land!" he shouted. "I don't care what you are or what pact you think exists. This is my property." Miguel/not Miguel turned to him. "Thomas Garrison, your ancestor made the agreement. Blood for protection, safety for sacrifice. You have prospered on this land for 4 generations because of this pact." "I made no pact. My family built this ranch through hard work, not some deal with whatever you are. Ignorance does not void the contract. The tribute will be collected. What happened next would be debated, analyzed, and dismissed as mass hallucination by officials for years to come." The 3 figures moved, not walked, but seemed to flow, toward the assembled crowd. People tried to run but found themselves unable to move. Pierce watched in horror as 7 ranch hands, including Roberto and Carlos, who had supposedly been taken earlier,
walked forward as if in a trance. They lined up before the figures, and one by one, they simply vanished. Not taken, not transported. They simply ceased to be where they were. The only evidence they had ever been there were 7 small piles of clothing that fell to the ground. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The figures were gone, the lights in the sky vanished, and Miguel Santos collapsed to the ground, apparently dead. The pressure holding everyone in place released, and chaos erupted. In the aftermath of what the media would call the Garrison Ranch incident, despite the FBI's best efforts to control the narrative, Deputy Logan Pierce found himself at the center of the most intensive investigation in Texas history. The official story, carefully crafted by federal authorities, blamed the events on a drug cartel using sophisticated technology to intimidate local ranchers. The missing men were listed as probable cartel victims. The cattle mutilations were attributed to a combination of predators and deliberate sabotage. But Pierce knew the truth, as did the 43 other witnesses who had seen the impossible that night. Most had been persuaded to sign non-disclosure agreements in exchange for substantial compensation from a government fund that supposedly didn't exist. Pierce had refused to sign, which made him both a problem and an asset to the ongoing investigation. 3 weeks after the incident, he was approached by a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Elizabeth Hartley from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They met in a nondescript motel room in Fort Stockton, away from potential surveillance. "Deputy Pierce," Dr. Hartley began, her manner professional but not unfriendly. "I understand you've been doing your own investigation into historical incidents similar to what occurred at the Garrison Ranch." Pierce nodded. He'd spent every off-duty hour in libraries and archives, tracking down old newspapers, interviewing elderly residents, piecing together a pattern that went back much further than anyone wanted to admit. "What did you find?" Hartley asked. Pierce pulled out a folder thick with photocopied articles and handwritten notes. "The pattern goes back to at least 1816, when this area was still Spanish territory. Every 52 years, almost to the day, unexplained livestock deaths, missing persons, strange lights in the sky. The indigenous peoples have oral traditions about it going back even further. And what do you think it means?" "I think Rosa Valdez was right. There's some kind of agreement, some kind of relationship between whatever those things are and this land. The Garrison Ranch just happens to sit at the center of it." Hartley studied him for a moment. "Deputy Pierce, what if I told you that you're partially correct, but the situation is more complex than even you imagine?" She pulled out a tablet, entering a long password before showing him a series of documents marked with classification stamps he'd never seen before. "In 1952, she began, President Truman authorized a project called Operation Longshot. Its purpose was to investigate and, if possible, establish communication with non-terrestrial entities that had been observed at several locations in the American Southwest. One of those locations was what is now the Garrison Ranch." Pierce stared at the documents, his mind reeling. "You're saying the government has known about this for 70 years? Longer? But 1952 was when we first attempted formal contact." The results were mixed. "We learned that these entities, whatever they are, have been visiting Earth for millennia. They have agreements with certain indigenous populations, trading knowledge and protection for biological resources." "Biological resources? You mean people?" "Among other things, the cattle mutilations, for instance. They're taking specific organs and blood samples. Our scientists believe they're conducting long-term genetic studies, possibly trying to understand how Earth life has evolved since their last major survey. And the government just allows this." Hartley's expression hardened. "What would you have us do, Deputy?" declare war on beings with technology thousands of years ahead of ours. They could eliminate our entire species if they chose to. The arrangement, distasteful as it is, maintains a balance. Tell that to the families of the 7 men who vanished. Those men are not dead. Pierce sat up straighter. What? We've had limited communication with the entity since 1952. They've assured us that humans taken as part of the tribute are not killed. They're relocated, supposedly to help establish a hybrid colony on another world. Whether that's true or not, we have no way to verify. This is insane. This is reality, Deputy. A reality that very few people are equipped to handle, which is why it remains classified at the highest levels. Pierce stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the Texas landscape stretched endlessly, hiding who knew how many secrets. Why are you telling me this? Because we need someone local, someone who understands the area and the people, to be our liaison. The Garrison Ranch incident was messier than usual. The entities typically operate more discreetly. Something went wrong this time, possibly due to Miguel Santos's interference. We need to ensure it doesn't happen again. Santos, is he really dead? The body we recovered wasn't entirely human anymore. Something had been done to him, some kind of biological modification. We think he was trying to alter the original pact, possibly to gain power or knowledge for himself. The entities didn't appreciate his initiative. Pierce returned to the table, staring at the classified documents. What exactly would this liaison position entail? Monitoring, reporting. When the next cycle approaches in 52 years, ensuring the tribute is paid with minimal public exposure. You would be well compensated, of course, and you would have access to resources and information that could help you protect your community in other ways. I'd be helping them take people. You'd be ensuring that only those who volunteer are taken. That's another thing we've learned. The entities prefer the willing participants. The forced taking only happens when the quota isn't met voluntarily. Who would volunteer for that? You'd be surprised. People with terminal illnesses looking for a chance at a different life. Those with nothing left to lose. True believers who see it as ascending to a higher plane of existence. We maintain a list. Pierce felt sick. The moral implications of what was being proposed were staggering. But he also thought about what might happen if someone else, someone who cared less about the community, took the position. I need time to think, he said. Take all the time you need. But Deputy, whether you accept or not, this conversation never happened. The documents you've collected in your personal investigation need to disappear, and you need to stop talking to people about what you saw. After Hartley left, Pierce sat alone in the motel room for hours, wrestling with everything he'd learned. Finally, he made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. He drove back to Presidio County and requested a meeting with Sheriff Coleman. Coleman looked tired, aged by the events of the past weeks. Logan, I hope you're not here to tell me you're quitting. You're one of my best deputies. No, sir. I'm here to tell you what I've learned, unofficially, off the record. Pierce told him everything. His investigation, the meeting with Hartley, the truth about what was happening. Coleman listened without interruption, his expression growing more grave with each revelation. Jesus Christ, Logan. You're telling me this has been going on for centuries, at least, and it's not just here. There are other sites across the world. We're just one small part of something much bigger. And the government wants you to help manage it? They want someone local they can trust, someone who understands the community. Coleman stood, walked to his window overlooking the small town of Presidio. You know what this means, don't you? If you take this position, You're agreeing to be part of something that goes against everything we swore to protect and serve. I know. But if I don't, someone else will. Someone who might not care about minimizing the damage. Have you talked to your family about this? Pierce thought about his wife, Maria, and their 2 young daughters. How can I? How do I tell them that everything they believe about the world is wrong? That there are things out there that see us as, what? Specimens. Resources. You don't. You carry it alone. And that's the burden of knowledge like this. They sat in silence for a while, both men grappling with the implications of what they now knew. Finally, Coleman spoke. Whatever you decide, Logan, I'll support you. But understand that if you take this position, there will be things you'll have to do that will change you. Secrets you'll have to keep that will isolate you. You'll be walking a line between 2 worlds, and that's a lonely path. Pierce nodded. He'd already felt that isolation beginning, the weight of knowledge that couldn't be shared. What would you do, Jake? Honestly? I don't know. Part of me wishes you'd never told me any of this. Ignorance was definitely bliss. But now that I know, I suppose someone has to stand watch. Someone has to be the shepherd, even if the flock can never know about the wolves. That evening, Pierce went home to his family. Maria greeted him with a kiss, his daughters with excited stories about their day at school. They ate dinner together, a normal family doing normal things, and Pierce felt the weight of the secret he would have to carry. Later, after the girls were asleep, he sat on his porch looking at the stars. They had always been beautiful to him, mysterious and inspiring. Now they held a different meaning, a reminder that humanity was not alone, not in control, not the apex of creation they'd believed themselves to be. His phone rang. It was Dr. Hartley. "Have you made your decision, Deputy Pierce?" Pierce thought about the 7 men who had vanished, about Juan Delgado who still woke up screaming every night, about the families who would never know the truth about what happened to their loved ones. He thought about the next cycle, 52 years from now, when someone else would have to face this same choice. "Yes," he said, "I'll do it. But I have conditions." "We're listening." "First, I want full access to all historical records related to these incidents. I want to understand the pattern completely. Second, when the next cycle comes, we do everything possible to use volunteers only. No forced takings if it can be avoided. Third, the families of the 7 men who were taken receive compensation, even if they never know why. Those terms are acceptable. Anything else? I want to know more about them, the entities. Who are they? Where do they come from? What do they ultimately want? Deputy Pierce, some questions are better left unasked, but I'll share what we know, which admittedly isn't much. They call themselves the Watchers. They claim to have been observing Earth for over 10,000 years. They say they're not invaders or conquerors, just scientists in a sense, studying how life evolves on different worlds. And the people they take? According to them, they're helping preserve human genetics by establishing colonies elsewhere. They claim it's a safeguard against extinction. Whether that's true or just a justification, we don't know. Pierce ended the call and remained on the porch until dawn, watching the stars fade as the sun rose over the Texas landscape. He'd made his choice, for better or worse. He would be the guardian of an impossible secret, the keeper of an inhuman pact, the man who stood between 2 worlds and belonged to neither. 5 years had passed since Deputy Logan Pierce accepted his role as liaison between humanity and the Watchers. In that time, he'd learned more about the hidden reality of the world than he'd ever wanted to know. The position came with resources, access to classified databases, connections to a network of similar liaisons worldwide, and technology that wouldn't be publicly available for decades. He still worked as a deputy sheriff, maintaining his cover, but his real job happened in the shadows. He monitored unusual activity, investigated UFO sightings that got too much attention, and occasionally dealt with those who stumbled too close to the truth. Most could be discouraged with careful misdirection. Some required more direct intervention. On a humid September evening, Pierce received an encrypted message that would change everything. It was from Thomas Garrison, who had sold his ranch after the incident and moved to Houston. The message was brief. "They lied to you. Meet me at the old ranch. Midnight. Come alone." Pierce knew it could be a trap. Garrison had been bitter about the government's handling of the incident, especially the cover-up that had cost him his reputation and forced him to sell land that had been in his family for over a century. But something in the message's tone suggested Garrison had discovered something important. Pierce drove to the abandoned Garrison Ranch, now owned by a corporate farming operation that had let the buildings fall into disrepair. The main house stood empty, windows broken, already being reclaimed by the desert. He found Garrison's truck parked by the old barn, and Garrison himself standing where the cattle had been mutilated 5 years earlier. "Thank you for coming," Garrison said. He looked older, grayer, haunted by what he'd witnessed. I didn't know who else to trust. "What's this about, Mr. Garrison?" "After I sold the ranch, I couldn't let it go. What happened here, what I saw, it consumed me. So I started investigating, used my money to hire private researchers, even got some hackers to break into government databases, and I found something. Something that changes everything." He handed Pierce a tablet displaying what appeared to be archaeological photographs. They showed cave paintings, clearly ancient, depicting tall figures interacting with humans. But there was something wrong with the images. "These were found in a sealed cave system under my ranch," Garrison explained. "The team I hired to survey the land for the new owners discovered them by accident. Carbon dating puts them at over 12,000 years old. But look closer." Pierce studied the images. The tall figures, clearly meant to represent the Watchers, were shown not as visitors or observers, but as prisoners. Human figures surrounded them with what looked like weapons or tools, keeping them contained. "That's not possible," Pierce said. "The Watchers have technology that's beyond our comprehension. That's what they want us to believe. But what if it's not true? What if they're not visitors from another world, but something else entirely, something that's been here all along?" Garrison pulled up more files. "I found references in ancient texts hidden in Vatican archives, in Tibetan monasteries, in Native American oral traditions that were never properly translated. They all tell the same story. The Watchers aren't aliens, they're prisoners." Prisoners? Who could imprison beings like that? We did. Humanity. Thousands of years ago, when we were different, when we knew things we've forgotten, the Watchers were sealed away, bound by rituals and agreements that limited their power. But over time we forgot why. The prisons became holy sites, then ruins, then nothing. And slowly, they began to break free. Pierce felt his understanding of everything beginning to shift. The pact, the tribute, it's not tribute. It's ransom. They take humans to breed servants, to create a hybrid race that can fully free them from their prisons. The cattle mutilations, the biological samples. They're trying to understand how to break the biological locks our ancestors placed on them. "How do you know all this?" Garrison pulled out a leather-bound journal. "This belonged to my great-great-grandfather, the one who established the ranch. He knew the truth. It's all here, passed down through the family, but my grandfather thought it was nonsense and stopped the tradition of passing on the knowledge. If I had known. Pierce read through the journal, written in fading ink. It described rituals, protection symbols, and most importantly, the location of one of the main prison sites, directly under where the Garrison Ranch house had been built. Your ancestors built the ranch here on purpose, Pierce said, understanding dawning. They were guardians, until they forgot what they were guarding. And when the knowledge was lost, the Watchers began to manipulate us, making us believe they were all-powerful visitors from the stars, rather than imprisoned entities desperate to escape. We need to tell someone. Tell who? The government already knows. They've known for decades, but they're either too afraid to act or have been compromised. Some in power might even be working with the Watchers, promised rewards when they're finally free. Before Pierce could respond, his phone buzzed with an emergency alert. He answered to hear
Sheriff Coleman's panicked voice. "Logan, we've got a situation. There are lights over the old Garrison property, dozens of them, and people are disappearing from town, just vanishing right out of their homes." Pierce looked up to see the sky above them beginning to fill with lights. Not 7 this time, but dozens, forming complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. "They know," Garrison said quietly. "They know we've discovered the truth." The ground beneath them began to vibrate, and cracks appeared in the earth, spreading outward from where the ranch house had stood. Something was rising from below, something that had been buried for millennia. Pierce grabbed his radio, switching to the emergency frequency he'd been given by Dr. Hartley. "This is Pierce. Code Black at the Garrison Ranch. The primary containment site has been breached. Repeat, primary containment is compromised." The response was immediate. "Understood. Evacuation protocols initiated. Containment teams en route. Estimated arrival, 40 minutes. "We don't have 40 minutes. The cracks widened, and from them emerged a structure that defied description. It appeared to be made of some crystalline material that shifted between solid and liquid states. It rose from the earth like a massive pyramid, but its geometry was wrong, with angles that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. From within the structure, the Watchers began to emerge. Not 3 this time, but dozens, then hundreds. They moved across the landscape with terrible purpose, heading toward Presidio and the sleeping population there. "We have to stop them," Pierce said. "How? With what?" Garrison demanded. "We don't have the knowledge our ancestors had. We don't know the rituals, the weapons they used." But Pierce remembered something from his training, something Dr. Hartley had mentioned in passing. Every liaison was given an emergency protocol, a last resort that was only to be used if containment was completely lost. He pulled out a device from his truck, something that looked like a modified satellite phone. He entered a long code, then pressed the activation button. Nothing seemed to happen. "What did you do?" Garrison asked. "Activated the threshold protocol. It's a dead man's switch the government installed after the Roswell incident. If the Watchers ever tried to break containment en masse, this would trigger." "What does it do?" Before Pierce could answer, the sky lit up with brilliant white light. Not from above, but from below. All across the desert, hidden installations activated, projecting energy fields that formed a dome over the entire region. The Watchers struck the barriers and recoiled, their forms flickering and distorting. Then the sound came, not heard but felt, a frequency that resonated in human bones but seemed to cause the Watchers immense pain. They writhed and collapsed, their tall forms crumpling like paper in flame. "It's working," Garrison breathed. But Pierce could see the cost. The energy required was enormous, and in the distance, he could see the lights of Presidio flickering and dying as power was drained from every available source. Dr. Hartley's voice crackled through his phone. "Pierce, the protocol can only maintain for 6 hours at maximum. We need you to initiate secondary containment." "What's secondary containment?" There's a site 3 miles north of your position. Pre-positioned charges that will seal the breach, but someone has to activate them manually. Pierce understood. It was a one-way mission. Whoever activated those charges wouldn't survive the resulting implosion. "I'll do it," Garrison said, having heard the conversation. "This is my family's failure." "Let me correct it. Mr. Garrison." "I'm dying anyway, Deputy. Cancer. Maybe 6 months left. Let me make those months count." He took the activation device from Pierce's hands. "Tell people the truth. Don't let them forget again." Garrison got in his truck and drove north toward the containment site. Pierce watched him go, then turned his attention to the watchers. They were recovering, adapting to the frequency. Some were already standing again, testing the barriers. Through his phone, Pierce could hear the chatter of government agencies mobilizing. Military units were being deployed, cover stories were being prepared, and somewhere, powerful people were deciding how much of the truth would be allowed to survive this night. 3 miles away, Garrison reached the containment site, a small concrete building that looked like a utility station but housed something far more dangerous. He entered the code Pierce had given him, and deep beneath the earth, charges that had been placed decades ago began their countdown. The explosion, when it came, was unlike anything Pierce had ever witnessed. It wasn't just destructive, it was reality warping. The space around the breach twisted and folded in on itself, creating a momentary black hole that sucked in everything within a half-mile radius. The watchers, their emerged structure, even the light itself was pulled into the collapsing point before it sealed itself with a thunderclap that shattered windows 50 miles away. Then, silence. The dome of energy flickered and died. Its purpose served. Where the ranch had been, where Thomas Garrison had made his sacrifice, there was now only a perfectly circular crater of fused glass, still glowing with residual heat. That's what the news reported, what the scientific community was told to confirm, what the citizens of Presidio County were instructed to believe. A rare, but not unprecedented celestial event that had struck an uninhabited area of desert, causing some unusual electromagnetic phenomena, but no serious damage beyond property destruction. Deputy Logan Pierce stood at the edge of the crater 6 months after the event, watching government contractors install monitoring equipment that would remain there permanently. Dr. Elizabeth Hartley stood beside him, both of them silent for a long moment. "The other sites are being reinforced," she finally said. "What happened here was a wake-up call. We've been complacent, relied too much on the original containment without understanding it." "How many other sites are there?" Pierce asked. 17 confirmed in the United States. Over 100 worldwide. Most are stable, but after this, she trailed off. Garrison was right, wasn't he? They're not aliens. Hartley was quiet for a moment. The truth is complicated, Deputy. They're not from another planet, no. But they're not from Earth either. Not originally. The best our scientists can determine is that they're from somewhere else. Another dimension, another reality. Somewhere our physics doesn't properly describe. They were trapped here thousands of years ago by humans who knew things we've lost. And the government has known this how long? Since 1947. Roswell wasn't a weather balloon or an alien crash. It was a partial containment breach. That's when we realized what we were really dealing with. Since then, we've been trying to maintain the status quo, keep them contained while we try to rediscover the knowledge our ancestors had. And the people they took, the 7 from the ranch, gone. When the breach collapsed, it took everything connected to that site with it. I'm sorry. Pierce thought about the families who would never have closure, the lies they'd been told. This can't continue. The cover-ups, the deception. People have a right to know. Do they? Would knowing help them?
Or would it create panic, chaos, potentially weaken the containment that keeps them safe? It was an old argument, one Pierce had struggled with for 5 years. But after what he'd witnessed, after Garrison's sacrifice, he'd made a decision. "I'm done," he said. "I can't be your liaison anymore. I won't be part of this system of lies." Hartley nodded, as if she'd expected this. "I understand. We'll need to debrief you, of course. And you'll need to sign additional non-disclosure agreements. But you can return to your normal life, as much as that's possible." "What about the next time? The 52-year cycle?" "We're hoping there won't be a next time. The breach changed things. The Watchers at this site are either destroyed or recontained so deeply they may never emerge again. But the other sites will need new guardians, people who understand both the truth and the necessity of keeping it." Pierce turned to leave, then stopped. Garrison's journal, his family's records, what happened to them? Classified and archived. But Hartley pulled out a flash drive. Copies sometimes get misplaced. Sometimes they end up with people who might need them someday. Pierce took the drive, understanding. The knowledge wouldn't die with him. It would be preserved, hidden, waiting for when it might be needed again. He drove back to Presidio, to his family, to his life as a small-town deputy. But he was changed. The world looked different when you knew what lurked beneath its surface. Every unexplained light in the sky, every missing person case, every strange occurrence took on new potential meaning. 3 years later, Pierce was elected sheriff of Presidio County after Jake Coleman retired. He used his position to quietly investigate other sites, other incidents, building a network of people who suspected the truth even if they didn't fully know it. He couldn't break his non-disclosure agreements, but he could prepare others, guide them toward their own discoveries. He established new protocols for missing persons cases, for reports of unusual phenomena. His deputies thought he was just thorough, maybe a bit paranoid. They didn't know he was watching for signs of other breaches, other attempts by the Watchers to break free. Late at night, he would read Garrison's journal, studying the symbols and rituals their ancestors had used. Most of it was incomprehensible, referencing knowledge and practices lost to time. But occasionally, something would make sense, a fragment of understanding that might someday be crucial. His daughter, Elena, now a teenager, once asked him why he spent so much time studying old books and obscure history. "Because the past has lessons we've forgotten," he told her, "and someday someone will need to remember them." She thought he was talking about law enforcement, about learning from past cases. She didn't know he was preparing her, subtly, carefully, for a truth she might someday have to face. The Watchers were still out there, in their prisons beneath the earth, waiting. The government was still maintaining its cover-up, balancing on a knife's edge between control and catastrophe. And somewhere, in small towns and big cities across the world, other guardians like Pierce were standing watch, knowing that humanity's greatest threat wasn't from the stars, but from beneath their feet. On the anniversary of the Garrison Ranch incident, Pierce would drive out to the crater. It had been turned into a memorial park, officially dedicated to Thomas Garrison, who died in service to his community. Visitors thought it referenced some act of civic duty. Only Pierce knew the truth of that service. He would stand at the edge of the fused glass crater and remember the night the sky filled with lights, the night the earth cracked open, the night humanity came within hours of losing a war it didn't know it was fighting. And he would renew his commitment to ensure it never happened again, because that was the real duty of those who knew the truth, not to reveal it, but to guard it, to stand between the sleeping world and the nightmares that wanted to wake, to be the thin blue line not just between law and chaos, but between humanity and something far worse.